This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. A few headlines just to set the scene. Biden says ICC war crimes arrest warrant outrageous. You don't need to read further to be confident he's referring to the ones issued for Benjamin Netanyahu and his sacked Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, rather than the Hamas commander Mohammed Deif, who is believed to already be dead. Corrupt, in quotes, war crime charges are anti-Semitic hate, says Netanyahu. What is he worried about? Israeli leader faces arrest if he flies into Britain, on the front of the Times. Netanyahu faces arrest if he flies into Britain, in another article within the paper. ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu over Gaza, and so it continues. This isn't an immediately obvious parallel to draw, but you know the Daily Telegraph journalist who claimed that she was being investigated by police for a non-crime hate incident, and then the police published the transcript of the interview, of the visit to her house, and it turned out she was being interviewed about a potential hate crime incident. She doesn't immediately have a lot in common with Benjamin Netanyahu, but I found myself thinking in both cases, shouldn't we let the legal process take its course before we jump to extremely strong and pungent conclusions? Shouldn't we just wait and see what happens? And in the first instance, the police have revealed that they will not be pursuing a prosecution. The case has been dropped after a very cursory visit to her home. Whether or not the police have buckled under the weight of hysterical media coverage, which completely ignored the misrepresentation or the misunderstanding of the facts, I do not know. But I always find myself, I don't know when did this become a naive position to adopt? You know, unless you're in a country where an adjudicated rapist president is trying to put an alleged sex offender in the Attorney General's office, unless you are living in the upside down, you wait for due process to take its course. You have faith in the rules-based order. You have to, because it's all that guards us against chaos. It's all that guards us against tyranny. Vladimir Putin has an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court in place, which essentially confines him to the boundaries of Russia, with a couple of exceptions. He'd be welcome, I'm sure, in North Korea if he hasn't been already. But it's what the rules-based international order does. And then you investigate, you interrogate the allegation, and you find out whether or not it's true. 140 countries are signatories to the International Criminal Court. And although the predictability with which Benjamin Netanyahu cites anti-Semitism against this allegation that him and his former defense minister have effectively starved people in Gaza by preventing aid from making its way in, something that has been talked about now for years, you begin to wonder quite how you've ended up in this situation, or how we've ended up in this situation. Not just the warrants being issued, but also the entirely predictable response from people who have allowed Benjamin Netanyahu to achieve impunity. This is what those of us who worry that he is worse for Israel than for almost any other element of this whole sorry saga. That's what those of us have tried to explain, that unswerving support for him is probably not in the best interest of Israel, have been worried about from the very start. Because you afford impunity to somebody who is so obviously unfit, whether or not the corruption charges against him, which he has sought to avoid. I don't suppose he can accuse Israeli courts of being anti-Semitic, can he? But they're quite desperate to put him in the dock as well. An important point that is missed by almost every frothing right-wing commentator pretending or professing to be offended by this move today. I'll say that again. Israeli courts are desperate to get Benjamin Netanyahu into a dock as well. So I don't imagine he'll be able to accuse them of anti-Semitism, but frankly, I wouldn't put it past him. However, he's comfortable firing off a personal attack on the prosecutor as the adjudicated rapist soon to arrive in the White House, who has failed to get the alleged sex offender into the Attorney General's office because new allegations have emerged and Matt Gaetz has withdrawn from the field. His team, his allies, are calling for the court to be sanctioned, something that actually, and you may not know this, I didn't, has a precedent. So the problem with, well, I mean, goodness me, why wouldn't you want the legal process to be? Why wouldn't you want justice to be seen to be done? You see, I mean, this is the best opportunity for defenders of Netanyahu to prove that he's done nothing wrong. And of course, if your bias is so complete that you can't contemplate even the vaguest possibility that he's done something wrong, then you have to accuse the institutions of being unfit for purpose and being biased. It is pure Donald Trump, and yet it's been undertaken by people who frankly should know better. Nobody has demonstrated ignorance, though, so far on the scale of the shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, who posted on social media a contribution so pant-wettingly ignorant, not to mention dangerous, that I presumed that it was fake. And when I tried to find it, I couldn't. So I doubly presumed that it was fake, but it wasn't fake. It has since been deleted, and I'll share that with you shortly because it's an almost perfect distillation of how bonkers, for want of a better word, some of the defences of Benjamin Netanyahu will become. Let's do a couple from my inbox just to show you what we're talking about. Mimi's been in touch. She says, I think you were born anti-Semite and anti-Israel. Shame on you. To which my question would be, how do you feel about the Israeli courts wanting to put Benjamin Netanyahu in the dock for a whole bunch of different alleged crimes? Are they anti-Israel? The Israeli lawyers and judges, are they anti-Semitic? I'm going to get pedantic and technical. Of course, the Hamas commander, who's also had a warrant issued, is technically a Semite. So is it anti-Semitic to issue an arrest warrant seeking his cooperation with investigations as well? It's incredible. And here's another one from Stephen. Why have you already hung, drawn and quartered Netanyahu? So this is what I mean by people who actually can't see how bent they've become. Because I say, who wouldn't want to see the legal process properly followed? Who wouldn't want to see, if you think there's a chance that he's innocent? And of course there's a chance that he's innocent. We are all innocent until proven guilty. Why would you not want the legal process to be followed? Let's follow the legal process. Stephen gets in touch to say, why have you already hung, drawn and quartered Netanyahu? So when you say, I think that someone should face trial because these allegations are very serious, people who have been boiled over the course of the last year into a position where they can't contemplate the possibility of wrongdoing, respond by accusing you of exactly what they are doing themselves. Let's wait for the due process of law to be applied. How dare you condemn him? No, hang on. I'm saying let's wait. You're saying he's innocent. So you're the one who wants to do away with due process. You're the one who wants to do away with the legal system. Without the international rules-based order, we are at the mercy of people like Putin. Without the international rules-based order, we have no... I hesitate to use the word civilization because that condemns everybody who lives in countries that are like Iran and Russia, that are totalitarian regimes. And I don't want to do that. But in the context of the world, if there is not a rule book by which we all abide, or by which all democracies are required to abide, if that rule book doesn't exist, or if that rule book gets torn up, what are we left with? What are we left with? I mean, it is unthinkable what the alternative would be. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, contributes to the conversation in this way, which is a very helpful, and it's not a word I often use about Honest Bob, but it's a very helpful illustration of how desperate these defences already are. He writes, the ICC has no credibility as it turns a blind eye to the crimes of tyrants like Khomeini and Putin. There are two problems with that sentence. Can you spot what they are? Or shall I tell you? Okay, Khomeini's dead, and there is a warrant out for Putin. But the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice is so immersed in culture wars and ignorance and idiocy and performative provocation that he either doesn't understand that or couldn't be bothered to find out, or elected to pretend that he didn't know it because he thought he'd get more clicks and giggles by telling that lie. The fact that he's deleted it suggests it wasn't the final option. Equating Israel's war of self-defense with Hamas's terrorism is absurd. Well, yeah, but no one's done that. Netanyahu and Gallant stand accused of starving the civilian population in Gaza. The Hamas commander stands accused of engaging in or helping to organise the terrorist massacre of October the 7th. Where's the conflation there? Starving people is a war crime. If it is proven to be true, a war crime has been committed. The UK shouldn't enforce this farcical arrest warrant from a politicised court that is mired in scandal. So a bloke who doesn't know that Khomeini's dead and Putin has an arrest warrant out on him, is now giving lectures on what the ICC should be doing. And then he uses, perhaps inevitably, for these deeply, deeply disingenuous and dishonest politicians, he uses the phrase kangaroo court. The latest decision will only fuel the growing perception that the ICC is a kangaroo court. How many times have I said to you how dangerous it is for you and I to sit in judgment on a case when we haven't sat in the court for every piece of evidence and every testimony? It's the politics of a Farage to claim that you know more than the CPS does about a case because you've been following Andrew Tate on Twitter, to claim that you understand better what has gone on in a courtroom because you want to write a front page article for tomorrow's Sun newspaper claiming that judges have all gone soft or that prison is a holiday camp. The idea that you have something as august and as internationally important as the ICC delivering a warrant for arrest of a man whose own country want to put him on trial for various other alleged crimes is dismissed without examination is proof of just how disastrous this entire debate has been in Britain. Because the conversation in other countries is going to be different. In the Netherlands, they've already said Benjamin Netanyahu hops off a plane in Amsterdam, he's under arrest. The British government is prevaricating, I think, hedging its bets a bit in the full knowledge that the likelihood of Benjamin Netanyahu hopping off a plane anytime soon in this country is very slim. But imagine an emergency diversion. He'll be welcome in Trump's America, international arrest warrant notwithstanding. But to be honest, to be in Trump's government or to be a friend of Trump's, the more criminal allegations you have against you, the more likely you are to actually be in favour with Donald Trump. But so imagine if some sort of emergency diversion unfolds as Netanyahu's flying to America to worship at the altar of Donald Trump and he gets diverted to Heathrow. Keir Starmer would have one heck of a big decision to make. But as a former DPP and human rights lawyer, I suspect there's only one way in which he could jump. So, I mean, part of me wants to ask how did this happen, but the answer, of course, is that we don't know. And I'd be asking how did this happen, as in how can people like Honest Bob Jenrick and the Daily Telegraph be queuing up to condemn the court? You remember when Owen Paterson, again, I've now brought the Daily Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson and the Conservative former politician Owen Paterson into a conversation about Benjamin Netanyahu. Why? Because due process is all that we have got. It's all that we have got. It's why extremist politicians hate it. It's all that we have got. It's all that guards us against tyranny, either in our own country or elsewhere. So when Owen Paterson was found to have broken the rules in the House of Commons, what did Boris Johnson, various Daily Telegraph journalists and Jacob Rees-Mogg try to do? They tried to rip up the rule book. They tried to condemn the actual parliamentary standards rather than condemning the parliamentarian who had been found by a jury of his peers to have broken them. So if you are a friend of Israel, and I hope you are, like me, a friend of Israel, then the possibility that the country has been governed by a war criminal is one that you would want to see interrogated immediately and robustly. If you are a friend of Israel, I would have thought that seeing the man in charge of your country on trial for very serious allegations and apparently well-evidenced ones would be a bit of a priority for you. But what the war has done and what Hamas handed him on a silver platter on October the 7th was the mother of all avoidances. Keep the war going for as long as possible in order to avoid being put in a dock in Israel, which is heartbreaking news for Palestinians in Gaza and in Lebanon, because, you know, if the possibility of being put in a dock in The Hague is now on the table, I don't think that is likely to see any softening of approach to killing civilians in either of those territories. It's extraordinary that this is debatable. At least that's how it seems to me. I'm not ill-informed, I'm not uninformed, but I'm not completely informed. It's possible there's stuff that I've missed, but I would have thought that if your man, for want of a better phrase, stands accused of war crimes, then you demand your day in court. You demand your day in court. Unless you feel that you have so successfully influenced the discourse in the countries that you care about, that actually you're going to be trusting your position to the court of public opinion, which has been very effectively dictated or directed by precisely the sort of politicians like Honest Bob Jenrick and various Daily Telegraph columnists that we've already alluded to today. Why would you not want Benjamin Netanyahu to be given a chance to prove his innocence 0345 6060 973. You get accused of something, what do you want? You want the chance to prove your innocence, right? And where do you do that? 0345 6060 973. There it is. And I, one more thing, if I may. I knew that something like this was going to happen because as soon as people, decent people, ringing me to support actions in Gaza, as soon as we got to that question of how many people would you be comfortable to see dead, and they would say, oh, I don't want to see any dead. And I would say, no, but we have to put a number on it. How much will be too much? It's a simultaneously crass and coruscating question at the same time. How many would be too much? And when you realised that even people living here with family and emotional links to Israel, even people living here were perilously close, and eventually, of course, they crossed the line, but perilously close to saying, I don't think there's an upper limit on how many people he can kill in pursuit of freeing the hostages, who we know now have never really been his top priority, or in pursuit of eradicating Hamas, which we have known all along was an impossible goal, and quite possibly the opposite has been achieved for future generations. So as soon as I heard you tell me that you couldn't really, or you weren't prepared, or you got very angry with me for just pointing out that there has to be a point at which we could say this has gone too far, this is too much, came out on October the 8th in full support of Israel, like most of the world, and their right to defend themselves, and their right to respond, their right to retaliate. But within weeks, it was becoming pretty clear that the response was going to dwarf the provocation. The response was going to dwarf the atrocity. The atrociousness of the response was going to dwarf the atrocity of October the 7th. And at precisely that point, I told you that this is such a dangerous road to go down, because if you give impunity to anybody, they will use it. And that's why the International Criminal Court finds itself in the unhappy position of having to issue a warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel. And I don't understand why anybody wouldn't welcome the opportunity he has been given to prove that he's not guilty of any of the things many people believe him to be, up to and including war crimes and genocide. 0345 6060 973. Your reactions, please.
James O'Brien on LBC.
23 minutes after 10. I do my best to respond to well-mannered or civilised criticism. Obviously, I'll also read out the uncivilised and obnoxious allegations of everything from anti-Semitism to being born-hating Israel. But if it is at least well-mannered, then I'll do my best. So, hi James, long-time listener here. I disagree with you and think it is anti-Semitism for the following reason. We're not going to have a debate today about whether or not this is anti-Semitic, but I will address this with respect. And the reason for that, I'm going to flipping lost it now, haven't I? That's always going to be the way when I click on the wrong button. Let me find it for you again. But I'll answer this one from Luke. Why is James only focusing on Netanyahu? He's barely spoken about Hamas also being wanted. The Israeli administration say that the Hamas commander for whom the warrant was issued yesterday is already dead. They say they've already killed him. So in the context of what should happen next with regard to due process and potential trials, there's a fairly strong reason why he wouldn't garner quite as much attention as perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu. And the other reason, of course, is that from the point of view of a British radio host, I don't have a government that is a supporter or an ally of Hamas. And the previous one making the point that I think it's anti-Semitic because neither Assad nor Khamenei with an A, not Khomeini with an O, which is Robert Jenrick's mistake, haven't had warrants issued against them. To which I'd again politely respond by saying there's 37, as far as I'm aware, ICC warrants. So unless you could demonstrate that a disproportionate number of them had been issued against Jewish people, I don't think you can claim that the issue of these two is anti-Semitic. I mean, in large part, Luke's point accidentally would be that half of that accusation gets cancelled out by the fact that they've issued one for a Hamas commander as well. Not the first one either, I don't think. And of course, one is still outstanding for Vladimir Putin. So I just don't think that works. And this from Mel. This is my favourite kind of message. Please stop making me think. My brain hurts. And that is what distinguishes this programme from some other content that may reach your ears on a daily basis. I will not excuse you from the responsibility of thinking. Alex is in Muswell Hill. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi. So I wanted to actually bring up a point which I've read about. Before Karim Khan went forward with the arrest warrant, he got a six-person expert panel to give their advice on whether there was grounds for war crimes. And one of the people on this panel, this is basically a refute to people who allege there's anti-Semitism involved.
Okay.
One of the people on this panel was a 94-year-old called Theodore Meron, who is a Holocaust survivor. He spent time in a concentration camp, and he's a former ambassador to the State of Israel. And he agreed with, Karim Khan's request that there was grounds for potential war crimes being committed by Netanyahu. And this is so the idea that he could be anti-Semitic as a Nazi Holocaust survivor.
And a former legal advisor to the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs. I mean, I didn't know this. I haven't got the wherewithal in front of me immediately to triple check everything you're saying. I've got no reason to doubt what you're telling me. But my goodness me, if I didn't know it, not to be conceited, then it's a fairly helpful illustration of how little relevant information is actually reaching the average member of the British public, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the only reason I know about it is because the journalist Mehdi Hassan was sharing it, and I've looked into it.
But Mehdi is, again, someone who is routinely accused of anti-Semitism, but the accusation, if it's levelled at him for holding views informed by Theodore Meron's interventions, it falls apart immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this it just shows how I think often the term is weaponized, and in this case, the idea that you could have a man like Theodore Meron. I mean, he's 94 years old. He's spent years in humanitarian law. I'm finding some of the detail now. Appointed by Karim Khan in 2022 as the a special advisor on international humanitarian law. This sounds like a rhetorical question, but why would you not want Benjamin Netanyahu to be offered the opportunity to prove his innocence in an independent court? I think for lots of people, I can't speak for everyone.
No,
but I think for lots of people, there will be at least an element of I've tacitly or explicitly supported Netanyahu's actions for a year now, and it's almost a damning indictment of me if he is, found guilty of.
I will have been cheerleading for a war criminal if this case goes ahead and a conviction is secured, which I think, for the record, is highly unlikely. But I'm more than happy to listen to other explanations for that.
Yeah,
I'm more than happy to listen to other answers, apart from the allegation that the whole process is anti-Semitic, which I think that by raising the contribution of Theodore Meron, you've rather perfectly nipped that one in the bud, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. I just thought really offending because I just thought it was an important point to raise.
No, and I'm grateful to you for it. And I mean, there is a reason why I didn't want the conversation to focus on that claim by Netanyahu, and the reason is that it's obviously completely bogus, but I probably should have recognised the need or at least the desirability of having conclusive proof of that bogusness. So Alex has provided that, and we can park it. Again, trying my best to be respectful to some messages that are sent from a disagreeing but polite perspective. Did I hear you correctly? This court has issued an arrest warrant for a man who is dead. That instills loads of confidence in their capabilities, says Roger in Brentwood. Israel say that he's dead, Roger. But as you will know, the ability of international organisations to check by going into Gaza, for example, has also been removed by Israel. So the International Criminal Court has no way of establishing whether or not Israel is telling the truth when they claim that this Hamas commander is dead, but they claim that this Hamas commander is dead. Happy to help. Shaz is in Kingston. Shaz, I'll come to you after the very latest headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
32 is the time. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a bit embarrassed, actually, that was news to me from Alex in Muswell Hill. I think some of it possibly rang a vague bell. The convening of the 6 experts on a panel, experts in international law, that rang a bell from when the warrants were first sought back in May, I think, of this year. But the presence on that panel of a 94-year-old renowned scholar of international and humanitarian law, a Holocaust survivor who was imprisoned for 4 years in a Nazi concentration camp, a former ambassador representing the state of Israel. The fact that Theodore Meron is on that panel, and today the Holocaust survivor stands accused of anti-Semitism effectively by the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, the fact that I didn't know that, and I try my very, very best on this subject. Some days it can feel a little bit too much. I'm not asking for any sympathy, by the way. I'm just explaining my embarrassment. The fact that I don't know that. They wrote a letter together and the financial and published it in the Financial Times. Theodore Meron, one of the co-authors of that letter, and detailing the grounds upon which they believe that the application for the arrest warrants was justified. They summarised their full report and described the war in Gaza as perhaps unprecedented in the extent to which it has given rise to misunderstandings about the ICC's role and jurisdiction, a particularly fractured discourse, and in some contexts even anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And so they felt, and I quote, that they had a duty to accept the invitation to provide an impartial and independent legal opinion based on evidence. And that opinion was that there is a case to answer. Wow. I'm sorry. I should have known that. I should have told you that. That's why you tune in, and I've let you down, and I'm sorry, and I'll do my best not to do it again. But the question remains, why wouldn't you want to answer that case, especially if you want your fella to be able to prove his innocence of war crimes? And the two specific war crimes he stands accused of are starvation of civilians and targeting civilians. Crimes against humanity, war crimes. I don't know how anyone can look at the death toll and think that all the civilian deaths are accidents. Hey, I know you can shout, oh, Hamas, human shields. But unfortunately, international law is a little bit more robust than Twitter slogans. Shaz is in Kingston. Shaz, what would you like to say?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on. And no need to apologise. That just having the conversation is enough nowadays. But why you wouldn't want to have Netanyahu in the dock is the risk that if he is proven guilty, damages the whole Israeli construct or the franchise, because if it's proven now, then retrospectively that opens up questions, and then it leads to more difficult conversations on, well, they don't want to give clearly the Palestinians, from the Israeli point of view, they don't want them to have a state. They've said that clearly, but then that opens up that discussion even more. So having... You mean
the current Israeli administration has expressed its opposition to a two-state solution. It's a bit more 100%, nuanced than your words allow, but I'm sorry to nitpick.
No, not at all. And I think even with international law, one thing I always get not confused but frustrated is that it is sometimes applied as a double standard, because Israel will say, oh, they're not adhering to international law, yet they're in the occupied territories, annexing land in the West Bank. So but you do need that rule of law. You need an independent panel that can go and give a fair adjudication of this happened.
And
they're not letting journalists in.
If any of these Hamas commanders were still alive, there were three against who warrants were sought. One has been issued. Then exactly the same 100%. Standards would apply to them, which is where that you start talking about conflation. It's where Robert Jenrick starts saying how you can't conflate Hamas terrorism with Israel's war of self-defense, apparently not understanding that what they stand accused of is not self-defense. What they stand accused of is a complete contempt for the notion of self-defense by using starvation as a weapon and by targeting civilians. And if they didn't do it, it would be easy to prove, or at least it would be would be helpful for them to be given an opportunity to prove it, at which point, of course, we remind ourselves that it's been almost impossible for international organisations and international media outside Gaza to determine exactly what has happened, because Israel won't let them in.
They won't let them in. They won't allow an independent party to evaluate the facts and make as balanced as possible opinion. They just won't allow that. That itself, to the people, the corpus of people who don't want to see this happen, the gut feeling is that, if there's something uncovered and our guy's in the dock and this goes the wrong way, then our whole enterprise is damaged.
And if you are conscious of that. And remember, this is a space into which other answers and other theories are encouraged to move. 03456060973 is the number. But if your only option then, under how you've described it, is to try to delegitimize the entire court, which is why Alex's information regarding the makeup of this panel of experts is so important, I think, and so interesting. And they found, I quote, reasonable grounds to believe that the suspects had committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Israel and in Gaza. A unanimous decision, which, of course, included the 94-year-old Holocaust survivor who had served in the Israeli governments previously.
One last point, James.
Yeah.
It brings up that it's the scale of this as well. It's on the international level, where when Shabra and Shatila happened, when Begin and Sharon were in power, there was an internal Kahan commission that found them guilty of colluding with Falangist militants. They were removed from power. So there was some due process, but now on the international stage, it can be even more damning. So, and that's why it's called. No, I know, and that's why when people like Farage and Jenrick start calling for us to withdraw from international rules-based institutions, you have to ask yourself what it is about rules that they hate so much. 10:39 is the time. I stress again, if you've got a better answer to the question than the idea that they don't want to go on trial because they are, I can't just say worried, they're fairly sure. They don't think they've got a chance of being acquitted. Otherwise, you demand your day. Okay, here it is. Why don't you want to appear in court? Because I don't think I'm innocent. You think you're innocent, you demand your day in court. It's a fundamental part of jurisprudence. Has been since before Magna Carta. It goes back to Rome. I demand my day in court. I will have justice. Oh, actually, I'd rather not have my day in court. Do you mind if I get the Daily Mail to write about what my justice should be, rather than an actual international criminal court subscribed to by over 100 other sovereign countries? Because I know you like the word sovereign in these sort of conversations, even though you've got no idea what it means. It's funny, isn't it? Once you actually start scratching at the surface of this sort of stuff, how simple it can apparently become. Ollie's been in touch. I wrote my PhD on Meron, James. He was originally working for and in Israel as an international lawyer, but he left his post when it became clear what was going on with regard to the illegal occupations. He wrote a book called Standing Up for Justice. It's an autobiography I'd highly recommend. He is the man when it comes to the interplay between international human rights law and international humanitarian law. No one really comes close. But of course, for Benjamin Netanyahu and his supporters, he's the anti-Semite. And just two messages now. So I imagine it's becoming a talking point in the crucibles of dishonesty and propaganda, but two messages now suggesting that the warrants have no legitimacy because the Hamas commander, who is also named, is apparently dead. So I will explain again, because I never get tired of helping people in the darkness see the light. It's the Israeli government, the IDF, I think, that say he's dead. No other international organisations have any way of checking because the journalists and the organisations can't get into Gaza. So if you think that somehow delegitimises the issuing of the warrant, then you need to give your head a wobble. David is in Sandefjord in Norway. David, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I thought my debut will be Mr. Hour, but you've got me today. So,
well, welcome. Talk about from one extreme to the other.
Exactly. I spent 10 years at the court, so I'd like to caveat everything by saying it's an organisation of fantastic people from all around the world.
What were you doing there?
I worked in the registry running the evidence management department, so picking up anything digital forensics and any devices that anybody being arrested would have. And my opinion is it was always criticised as being a court of Africa, that it only focused on certain countries. And the irony was, whenever we tried to not do that, this type of thing happened. Knockback from the West, from the signatories of the court, and it was easy when it was the US doing it, but now it's my own country, the UK, basically saying that, or not committing to arresting Netanyahu, as you said there.
Well, that's Yvette Cooper this morning claiming, I think somewhat unhelpfully and unimpressively, that she doesn't think it's her decision to make. But Sir Keir Starmer has backed the International Criminal Court on this. So even the Telegraph front page says Starmer supports arrest of Netanyahu. But what it doesn't address, and what he hasn't really been asked yet, is whether he'd be prepared to essentially do it himself.
Right.
Put your trousers on your nicked, sort of thing from Sir Keir Starmer.
Exactly, and I'd love to see that day. So I think the answer to why wouldn't you want to see a day in court, I think Netanyahu doesn't respect this court. This justice isn't for him. This justice is for African countries or those that commit war crimes. This is not a war crime in his opinion. So why should he answer to this? And that's fine. That can be his opinion. But the other countries, the UK specifically, should say, no, you have to answer the court. You've been asked to answer this and have justice.
And who is going to be clearer on that question than a former director of public prosecutions and international human rights lawyer?
Mm-hmm.
You would hope, wouldn't you?
You would. We will
see. I mean, it is moot, I suspect, and as I suggested earlier, in the absence of a sort of emergency diversion while he's flying to visit an ally. I can't quite imagine him seeking to set foot in this country any more than Vladimir Putin would, while an international arrest warrant is in place against him. But my goodness me, your perspective on this as someone that has worked there. How do you address the idea, which we will hear, that he wouldn't get a fair trial?
He would get the level of justice that the court has been set up to give, and in my opinion, that was extremely high. The other criticism they get is that the cases take too long. I worked there for 10 years, and one of the cases lasted for 10 years. I was there the same time as that person. So is that fair that it takes so much of your time? Who knows? I can't answer to that. But
if it was you standing accused, then I think you struggle to argue that you don't want it to be as thorough as is humanly possible. That, of course, can sometimes seep into the sclerotic. Thank you, David. Just to clarify, 124 members of the ICC. I think I was reaching into the ether for a number earlier, and I may have happened upon the wrong one, but 124 members of the ICC, which is responsible for enforcing who are responsible for enforcing arrest warrants that are issued. And the Prime Minister's official spokesman said that the government respected the court and refused to rule out that Mr. Netanyahu would be arrested if he came to the UK. These comments are, according to the Telegraph, widely supportive or widely interpreted as supportive of the decision. He said, "We respect the independence of the ICC." Of course, the likelihood or the willingness of a UK government to actually enforce that arrest warrant is something that will only really be examined in the event of it becoming a possibility, and it almost certainly won't. 10:46 is the time. James O'Brien on LBC. 10:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And again, I do my best to be even-handed, but the idea that because this 94-year-old Holocaust survivor and former Israeli diplomat has previously been critical of Israel means he can't be trusted is absolute balderdash. I think that's coming from Stephen. I'll tell you why. The occupations are illegal. And if you are an international lawyer, if you are an upholder of international law, you can't not be critical of illegal occupations. It's not a matter of whether or not you value the modern state of Israel, whether or not you believe that the modern state of Israel is must be protected at almost all costs. The costs at which it must not be protected are the costs that breach international law. So again, the reaching today is extraordinary. You can't accuse people of anti-Semitism because there's a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor, Jewish Holocaust survivor, on the panel that has decided that the warrants are justified. You can't really claim that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't deserve to be put on trial because the evidence that has been collected is pretty comprehensive. And if there isn't enough evidence, then it would be because evidence gatherers weren't allowed into Gaza by Benjamin Netanyahu's administration. So what are you reduced to? You could claim, it's a ridiculous one because they've issued a warrant for a dead Hamas terrorist, to which the response is, well, no, only the IDF have said that he's dead. The rest of us can't establish whether that's true or not for the reasons mentioned a moment ago about not being able to get into Gaza to do that kind of work. So in answer to the question, why on earth would Benjamin Netanyahu's supporters try and work out what's going on in his mind, although many people in Israel believe that he's prolonged this war in order to postpone his own criminal court cases in Israel. I don't know how anti-Semitic the Israeli court system is, but they want to put him in the dock as well. Benjamin Netanyahu's supporters, who were ringing me in their droves a year ago, why do you think he doesn't want the opportunity to prove his innocence? 0345 6060973. Andrew knows who I'm talking about. He says, I listen to your show every day. It's clear from some of your contributors over the last year that there will always be a group of people who believe Israel can do no wrong and are affronted by the very such suggestion. They would not tolerate this slavish, misguided loyalty to any other nation. That's not true, Andrew. Actually, that phrase, that adage, my country right or wrong, is a cliche for a reason. It's a figure of speech for a reason. It works. It lands. But that's what international rules-based institutions are for, to make sure that there are standards by which everybody in the civilized world, every leader in the civilized world must abide by. And Benjamin Netanyahu stands accused of not abiding by it, which leads to the question we're asking today: why on earth would he not want an opportunity to prove his innocence? 10:51 is the time. Jeffrey is in Barnet. Jeffrey, what would you like to say?
I don't know that I'm answering your question directly, but I wanted to...
How dare you?
Well, I began listening after you'd done the introduction,
okay.
So and you've
very
just
wise,
repeated the
very
question.
wise, Jeffrey, very wise. But I'm interested to hear your contribution regardless.
So I'm a rabbi. And when I heard the subject, what came to my mind was a letter that I and 31 other rabbis, progressive rabbis, I have to admit, I think apart from one of them, signed in the Sunday Times in August, when the President of the Board of Deputies protested about the possibility of the ICC holding Netanyahu to account. The 31 rabbis, including myself, wrote against the President of the Board of Deputies, upholding international law and saying that it is only international law which we have to respect, and which was in fact, after the Holocaust, it was Jewish jurists who particularly, like René Cassin, instituted it. They were very much a part of it. So we were entirely in favour that this is the right way to proceed.
I remember that letter, actually, from August of last year, and I fear it's another example of something that hasn't received anything like the level of coverage that would have been afforded to something or someone or supportive of, more supportive of Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't know. I appreciate you haven't heard the whole programme, so feel free to decline the invitation to answer any other questions. But what do you think has happened over the course of the last year, Jeffrey? How has Israel found itself or been led by Netanyahu into this sort of situation?
I've been involved with Israel-Palestinian work since 1967. I co-chaired the Jewish Youth Emergency Committee when we feared that Israel was going to be wiped off the map.
Yes.
And it was an extremely emotional time. But from that point on, in fact, we were in touch with Consul General of Israel and went to him immediately after the Six-Day War. We had 3 huge warehouses full of blankets, medical equipment, tents, and we said, we need to distribute this now to the refugees who are not Jewish refugees, but who are Palestinian refugees. And he said, I think that's a really good idea. Come back tomorrow. I'll telegram Jerusalem. It was in the days of no internet. And we came back the next day and he said, well, I'm really sorry, but the government feels that it would be a sign that we felt guilty if we were to accept that offer.
Gosh.
From that point on, I knew that I was a rabbi and not a politician. And I've been absolutely clear that the occupation is illegal. I'm horrified about what's happening at the moment. Many of my colleagues, I'm 83, so I recognise that I'm retired, and it's much easier for me than it is for a rabbi who is still trying to keep his community together, yes, where some of them feel very much the pain, which is accurate, of Israelis who don't get the news that we get over here. It's very censored, what they're able to see. They have to watch Al Jazeera, and I have a close colleague who's a rabbi in Israel who I talk to, so I know what I'm talking about. Yes. They watch Al Jazeera to know what's going on. I think that recognition of the horror of what took place on October the 7th and the recognition of the fear that has been evoked once again in the Jewish community that instead of never again, again is happening. Yes. And the Jewish community just feels it. It's in our bones. We're a traumatized people. And
Netanyahu has exploited that perfectly natural response.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A great big Tesco lorry. I thought I was in a quiet place as a lorry just coming past. Maybe I can hide.
Well, in a way, Jeffrey, it's a reminder of the success of the diaspora, that enormous Tesco lorry, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I compare the size of it is probably the size of the humanitarian trucks, which are not being allowed by the Israelis to go into Gaza.
Good Lord.
It's huge. It is absolutely huge. And it helps me to recognise the pain, the suffering. This last week, I was in a meeting with Dr. Victoria Rose, a British plastic surgeon, yes, who's been over twice to Gaza, who you could get on your programme, okay, to describe the horror that she's seen there.
I'm so glad you were listening today, albeit belatedly, and I'm so grateful to you for because you've articulated quite perfectly how difficult this is for somebody in your position and how much more difficult it would be if you still had a congregation, if you weren't retired. I wonder if you could help my listeners just with one final thing and just explain what you mean when you use the word progressive to describe yourself and most of the other signatories of that letter last year.
Yes, I think I can do it relatively truthfully and easily. Traditional rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, of whom the majority rabbis in Israel are Orthodox, believe that the Bible, the 5 books of Moses particularly, were given by God word by word, apart from a few little question marks raised by a 14th century Rabbi Ibn Ezra. Mm-hmm. The progressive rabbis believe that it is the best seeking by human beings, very wise, very spiritual, but the words were written down by human beings, and therefore they're not sacrosanct in the same way. We're not fundamentalists, and therefore we have to question, and we have to be open to the realities of the world in which we live.
You're right. That is a fairly helpful explanation. Jeffrey, thank you.
Well, thank you, and I'd love to speak to you again. I admire you enormously.
Well, that's incredibly kind of you, thank you. And we will definitely talk again, and I will try and get Victoria Rose onto the programme as well.
Great, thank you.
It's, it's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and just gosh.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 11. A lot of you very moved by the last call that we took from Jeffrey, and I can just tell you that you're not the only one. 3 minutes after 11, a complete change of pace now, a complete change of focus. 7, this is extraordinary. You know, we talk a lot about partisanship in politics, tribalism. We talk a lot, indeed, on this programme because we invented the word, I think. Footballification, when your scarf is tied so tightly. That's what progressive means, isn't it? Is that your scarf is not tied so tightly around your neck that you cannot see any good in people who may disagree with you or any bad in the people for whom you cheer. But can you remember a headline that contained 7 former education secretaries from across, well, it's 2 parties, maybe 3 actually, given that period of coalition. I haven't checked the full list of names. 7 former education secretaries have urged Sir Keir Starmer to be bold in reforming the curriculum and the assessment system. 7, count them. Now, we touched on this a couple of days ago, completely by accident, when I read a story about how we needed to make the curriculum less middle class, and I read it to you and I shared it with you, and we had a satisfying but ultimately inconclusive conversation together, didn't we? Because we felt there was something wrong. I'm sounding like a teacher. Why am I talking like we did? Didn't we? Didn't we, class? Didn't we, boys and girls? We felt there was something unhelpful about suggesting that only middle class kids benefit from going to the theatre. And then when you scratched more at it, you realised that what was prioritised in a classroom favoured sections of society who were already advantaged. So the need for something more was clear at the end of that conversation, even though we weren't 100% sure, or the need for something different was clear at the end of that conversation, even though we weren't 100% sure how much of the old stuff we should get rid of or what the new stuff should look like. And part of the problem, I think, was caused by the presence of that dread word class in the conversation, in the heart of the story. It's not present in this one. And that perhaps is why it is going to be easier to dig into. My first problem is not knowing who is going to be best qualified to contribute to this conversation. But guess what? Do you know how that works? I mean, it doesn't often work quite as powerfully as it did with Jeffrey a moment ago. But generally speaking, I don't know whether you're qualified to contribute to this conversation or not. You do. It's why my introductions can be so lengthy, because I want you to feel something which you won't feel now at 11:05, but by 10 past or quarter past or 25 past on a good day, by 11:15, you might, he is actually talking about me, or he is actually talking to me, or he is actually talking about something I can help him with. So who is going to be best qualified to comment upon the headline that states, with the support of 7 former education secretaries from across the parties, that schools are not preparing children for working life? 7 former education secretaries urging Sir Keir Starmer to be bold in reforming the curriculum and assessment system. So this is a powerful cross-party alliance. And remember, many of these characters would have overseen many of the most significant changes to schools over the past 40 years. They describe a once-in-a-generation golden chance to create schools that better prepare children for work and life. Now, I don't think anyone is suggesting that school should be a kind of a hothouse exclusively to create economic units, to create more productive economic units. But clearly there's a balance to be struck, isn't there? I think the Tories went the other way. They sort of turned schools into play. In fact, they even said so out loud, didn't they, towards the end of the madness? They started talking about how university degrees that didn't have an obvious application in the work market were not worth studying. But as we've established, there are reasons why very right-wing people, or indeed very, very left-wing people, have a problem with art that creates empathy. So I've got a tickle in my throat. Why is it 7 minutes after 11? How about twice a week, 7 minutes after 11? I do a whole hour. Is it when I tear up? Is it when I get a bit teary and then it does something to my tear ducts? I don't know, but I've got a tickle in the back of my throat and I'm going to have to deal with it. It doesn't happen in Mystery Hour. Maybe I'll save it for next Thursday. So, what do they mean I mean, they've given us some indications of what they mean by this. Charles Clarke, for example, says the biggest mistake of the last Labour government was not pressing ahead with changes to A-levels and GCSEs. Estelle Morris, remember her, Baroness Morris of Yardley, took over from David Blunkett, says the time is right for a fundamental rethink. The whole country is looking for a reset, said Charles Clarke. Teachers are demoralised, there are recruitment issues and all kinds of problems. The system is ready for change. So Kenneth Baker is involved as well, just in case you think they're all Labour people. And Baroness Morgan, who was Education Secretary under David Cameron, said that the world is Justine Greening's on the list. God, it's like a sort of greatest hits of education secretaries. That basically they're almost all there, and they are all saying that we need a serious change to make children better equipped for, if I said the modern world, for a rapidly changing world rather than for the modern workplace. So I want you to stop for a moment, particularly teachers, parents, or former pupils, because I tell you what, guess what? We're all former pupils. We won't all have been educated in the British system or indeed in the British state system. But Jack says it's when you stop talking, James, that's when you get a tickle in your throat. That is a very good piece of advice, which I will take to heart by never stopping talking again. I don't know what the problem would be, but I do know this. I don't want to bring class into it because we had that conversation earlier in the week. I do know that the stuff I thought really mattered is not the stuff that you need in 2024 to make your way in the world. All right? Now, it shouldn't be excluded, the ability to quote poetry or the ability to cite Shakespeare or all of the stuff that I love and all of the stuff that means a lot to me and all of the stuff that I owe in many ways to inspirational and incredible teachers. But in terms of making your way in the world, it's not that much use. I also remember, who else has had this conversation with their own children about when you are ever possibly going to put Pythagoras into practice in your adult life? I remember when my youngest said it. And do you know what I said? I wonder if you can guess what I said. I may have told you before, but I had asked exactly the same question of a maths teacher 35 years previously. So why do we need to learn this? You can imagine what sort of a pupil I was. Why do we need to study this stuff, sir? Why do we need to study this, sir? When are we ever going to need Pythagoras? Pythagoras' theorem in our lives? And he gave me an answer, which wasn't satisfactory, but it was at least accurate in a way. And I gave the same answer to my daughter, and she looked at me, quite rightly, as if I'd completely taken leave of my senses. Do you know what I said? I wonder if all math teachers, I wonder if there's only ever one answer you can give to the question of why do you need Pythagoras' theorem, sir? And the maths teacher also had responsibility at my prep school for marking out the lines on the rugby pitch. And don't ask me the technical details of it, but he told me, and I have no reason to doubt him, that he couldn't get the right angles 100% correct on the rugby pitch unless he used Pythagoras'. Do you know, now that I think about it, I think he might have been yanking my chain. But 35 years later, my little girl said to me, or my daughter, she wasn't that little at the time, said to me, Dad, why do we have to study Pythagoras? And I said, well, you may, for example, find yourself having to plot the lines on a rugby pitch one day. And she said, without missing a beat, that there are machines that can do that. And I suddenly realised that in the 35 years between me asking that question and her asking that question, the machines had probably arrived that would be able to plot a perfect right angle if you were tasked, unlikely though it may be, with marking out a rugby pitch on a large expanse of lawn anytime soon. So I don't know if that's relevant, but I do know this. If 7 education secretaries from across the political spectrum join forces to say this needs some serious changing, this system as it stands is not fit for purpose, then 2 things immediately occur to me. The first is, could this be the missing piece of the jigsaw that we've been looking for the last few months? The missing piece of the jigsaw about why there are so many young people who are not going to work. And the answer is a curious combination of not being ready to do it and work not being ready for them. But I want to see it through that end of the telescope, through the young person's end of the telescope. So I have failed really to identify to find this constituency. We've done, I think, 3 phone-ins on it, and I've barely spoken to 3 people who fit perfectly into the category under discussion, which is people aged 16 to 24 or 18 to 24 who are not in training, who are not in full-time education, and who are not in work. And then you've got the added level of people who are not seeking work. And illness aside, although illness may account for almost all of them, illness aside, who are they? Where are those people? And I failed to find you. I've even failed to find your mum and dad. I thought your mum and dad might ring in and say, oh, I've got one upstairs at the moment, James. But I failed to find you, but the numbers are stunning. The numbers are staggering, and they're getting bigger all the time. To the point where Daily Telegraph columnists are now using them to explain why we need less immigration. And I get that. I mean, I know that the constituency exists, and I know that it's lazy or overly ambitious to try and pin it down to one particular phenomenon, but this could be part of it. It could simply be that young people don't feel that they've got the skills to go out into the workplace and find a job. Rightly or wrongly, if that's how they feel, it's probably worth paying attention to. So the Times Education Commission, which, it's not very sexy because it's education rather than immigration, but the Times Education Commission is, for my money, one of the finest enterprises undertaken by a British newspaper in the last 20 years. It never ceases to provide important and informative coverage of what is, by any measure, one of, if not the most important issue that any country can ever grapple with, the education of the younger generation. So what is wrong with the current system, and why do you think that? So the most obvious early callers might be teachers. And you're frustrated by having, because that was in the class coverage that we did earlier in the week. Science teachers in particular felt that they were teaching stuff that no longer mattered. Science teachers felt that they were teaching their students stuff that was out of date. I think we made a slight mistake of seeing it through the lens of class, whereas in fact it's about modernity. It's about generational change. It's not about social mobility. It's about why the system is still preparing young people for leaving school in 1995 or leaving school in 2005, not leaving school in 2024. So I want teachers to tell me what is wrong with the current system and what should it look like instead. 0345 6060973. I want parents to tell me about why you think these moves are necessary. How would you prove to me that schools are not preparing children for working life? And the other way, and I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this, but I'm also conscious that it can be quite funny, the other category of people would be employers. So when you're trying to find somebody, and the closer you are to my age or above, I suspect the more pertinent this point will be. You're trying to find somebody to do a job that you considered to be relatively straightforward, and you are finding that school leavers can't do it. So 4 constituencies of callers on this one, from which hardly anybody would be excluded. So the first one is teachers. Do you actually feel, and you've got no choice because a curriculum's a curriculum, innit? That's Latin. Do you feel that your curriculum is inadequate, unfit for purpose, in need of serious modernisation? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Number 2, parents. You can't quite believe how ill-equipped for the workplace your children are. I don't think there'll be many of them, but prove me wrong on 0345 606 0973. Number 3 is going to be employers. You can't quite believe the school leavers presenting themselves to you today expecting to do jobs that you have had people doing for years that they are clearly not equipped to do. What is going on there? That's not just going to be curriculum. That could be soft skills. I have a friend who runs a hairdressing salon, and he tells me, I've mentioned this to you before, every single time I go in for a haircut, which, as you may have noticed, is not as often as I should, memo to self, he tells me a story about his latest attempt to find an apprentice. And the most common complaint when they disappear after a day and a half is that they don't like being on their feet all day. Now, I don't want to malign an entire generation, but at some point, the plural of anecdote starts knocking at the door of data. And he's told me so many stories. I told you the one about, I forgot this. This was a classic. The one who wanted the job, wanted to come in and start training, liked all the terms and conditions, but just said, there'll be some days I won't be able to come in just so you know, because my neighbours have just got a new cat and I might have to look after it. And people didn't believe me about that. I went back in and checked with him. So it's true. So that would be an example of young people not being given non-academic knowledge, non-academic skills that they need to get ahead in life, to get ahead in the workplace. And remember, I am categorically not supportive of the idea that young people are just widgets, economic units to be rendered as productive as possible for a future employer, so that, to use one of my favourite adages, one day they can step into the car park of wherever it is they're working with their boss, and their boss can drape an arm casually around their shoulder, decency permitting, and say to them, look, you see that Porsche over there? I just bought that Porsche. And the employee will go, oh, well done. And he'll say, if you work very, very hard for the next few years, one day I'll be able to buy another one. So I don't want to create those people. The inner life, the richness of the human condition, the arts, the culture, the music, all of it. But something's gone horribly wrong here. And I want to know what it is. 0345 6060. This is not Pythagoras. 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:21. Based on their position on the keypad, James, writes Thomas rather winningly, I think you'll find that 973 is a right-angled triangle, so it is Pythagoras related at the very least. That's clever. All right, that's the cleverest take. So you could go straight to the top of the class, alongside all the other clever clogs telling me that there are many circumstances in which they have to use Pythagoras' theorem. Joe, for example, uses it all the time to square up walls when he's building. We call it the 3-4-5 trick. And Andy tells me that archaeologists use Pythagoras' theorem all the time for marking out trenches if GPS equipment is not available. But the cleverest clogs of all is Ari, who writes, you didn't name the fourth category of caller. And you're absolutely right, I didn't. That was deliberate, just to check who was paying attention. It turns out, just you. And the answer is former pupils. So you've left school relatively recently, or not even that recently, but you recognise the claim that that pupils are not being equipped properly for the modern world of work and other, because you're one of them. Gemma is in Tower Hamlets. Gemma, what would you like to say?
Hi there.
Hello.
It's great to be on the show.
Well, how do you know that? You've only just arrived. It might be one of the worst experiences of your life.
Well, I've always found it very interesting to listen to what you have to say and how you go with the callers.
Thank you.
I'm 18. I turned 18 at the start of this year, and I've been doing my A-levels from home. I think I fall within one of your categories, but I'm slightly outside in that I've had some mental health struggles, which means I haven't been able to finish my A levels by now, which is what other people my age have been doing.
Yes.
I got straight 9s for my GCSEs.
Wow.
And I've been very academic. I've had a very clear path by my parents, by my teachers. The whole school system sort of laid out that people who, are academically gifted, they do well in their GCSEs, A-levels, university, etc.
Yes.
And I've been clear on that. However, since dealing with my mental health struggles, which are unrelated, I've had to think about what I actually want to do.
Yes.
And I've found myself with, good GCSEs and a relatively open mind, and I still feel quite unprepared to decide about my future and go into the workforce, even without any previous issues. I feel like I don't know where to go, and I don't know what to do. That's partly because of the climate of the world at the moment. What kind of job could possibly make a difference, or what is right for me? The jobs that I previously wanted, like, I don't know, being a lawyer or, I don't know, a doctor.
Why have they slipped out of your reach, or why have they become things that you no longer want to do, if I can ask that?
Partly because of, obviously, no one really wants to work in the NHS at the moment.
Right. Okay.
And being a lawyer it's achievable, but I don't know, the world is quite bleak at the moment. It's hard to see where any one person could fit in. Gosh.
I mean, I'm going to choose my words very carefully, Gemma, because I appreciate that you're having a tough time of it. And the first thing that occurs to me is that none of what you're describing is necessarily a consequence of the education system. It's more a consequence of the world into which you move when you leave it. But as soon as I say those words out loud, I find myself thinking, well, maybe that's the point. Maybe the education system should be making people like Gemma feel better equipped to cope or to fit into the world outside. I don't know what an anti-bleakness curriculum would look like, but I would be all for it. And the second thing that occurred to me listening to you was a lot of people feel like that or felt like that at 18. It could be a more existential condition that you described than a social one. I remember feeling at 18 that I'd never really find a place in the world, or that my alleged talents would never be noticed or appreciated. So it's so hard to unpick the various disparate parts of what can put you in a place like the one you're in at the moment, isn't it?
I agree. I think I've focused more on where I fit into the world, but in terms of the education system, it sort of prepares you for a different world that is so out of touch, a world where a university degree is very highly valued and applicable to jobs, and a world where, there's a certain level of work-life balance that doesn't take into account working from home, that doesn't take into account so many parts of the modern world that we pride ourselves on. That's kind of left aside in the education system, and there's still that very traditional progression that is...
Yes. So like a conveyor belt that nobody's bothered to stop and re-engineer for a few generations, or like a video game when you're marching around collecting achievements without anybody really knowing whether they're very valuable at all. Everyone just has agreed that these are valuable achievements, but when you find yourself pulling them out of your sack to try and find a place in the world, they turn out not to be worth much at all.
Yes, and I think people are having this realisation at the sort of, 24, 25 age when this university, and they've realised, I can't get a job in anything that I'm interested in or anything that's related to my degree. And because of my circumstances, I've sort of thought this through a little earlier.
Yes, I think you're right.
And I think it's important before people go spending their time and money on things that aren't going to help them or prepare them for the real world, they need to take the red pill. Yeah.
No, and that makes that idea of a form of opting out a lot easier to grasp. But what are the alternatives?
There are sort of apprenticeships and things like that, and I know there are some colleges that do T-levels and courses that are specialised for jobs, schools that work with companies.
Well, this is precisely, I think, the point of this call, isn't it? Is not your call. I mean, the call by the 7 education secretaries is to just recognise that these achievements you're being encouraged to collect are not actually going to be much use to you when the time comes to try and apply them to your acceleration through life, through the world.
Yeah, exactly.
It's brilliantly put. Again, I'm very conscious of not wanting to patronise you, but I do wonder whether the fact that you're dealing with this stuff and wrestling with this stuff now may 5-10 years from now turn out to have been a blessing in disguise, Gemma, because you've wrestled with it early. You're forewarned is forearmed. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, that's what I've been telling myself.
Well, that's what I'm telling you as well, and I'm also really hoping that it's true too.
Thank you.
No, thank you. There it is, in one of the nutshells that we examine. Thank you, Gemma. I'll read this out because this is part of what people like Gemma and the rest of us in many ways are up against. James, you won't read this out, but I'm sick and tired of hearing from these so-called educated people about getting work. I'm 44 and run my own business. I have the ups and downs, so I just get on and get out there. Always the mental health shout gets bandied about. So weak. Simon, you've got the name of your company on your WhatsApp message, so I could encourage people who applaud your position on an 18-year-old girl who's been suffering with her mental health so much that they want to come and buy your carpets, but I won't. I'll instead say this. Would you say that to someone with cancer or a broken leg? Would you say that to someone with emphysema? Always the health shout gets bandied about. I don't think you would you? Which I guess makes your second point about as correct as your first point about me not reading your message out. Here's Thomas Watts with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:33 is the time. More on that situation at Gatwick shortly. As you've just heard, the airport has evacuated a large part of its south terminal following a security incident. Passengers being told they will not be able to enter the terminal as staff investigate. But before we get more on that, let's get back to the phones and the question of why schools are not preparing children for life, for the modern world, for working life, whichever of those you prefer. Jessica is in Taunton. Jessica, what would you like to say?
Hi, big fan, James.
Thank you.
A couple of things. First of all, I am a teacher and I find the curriculum so horrifically boring. I have to try and find ways to make it hugely interesting to me, let alone a class of children.
How long were you a teacher before? Actually, do you mind, can I put you on hold while I take a quick call from Simon Calder about what's going on at Gatwick?
Sure.
Are you sure that's okay? You don't need to be back in the classroom imminently or anything like that?
No.
Okay,
no,
good. Just tell him you've got a cough or something like that. It's 11:34. Simon Calder is the doyen of travel journalists, travel correspondent for The Independent. What do we know, Simon, about the situation at Gatwick?
James, first of all, I'm really sorry to be reporting on yet more travel trouble, but yes. Let's tell you what happened. So probably shortly after 9 this morning, I understand that a suspicious item was found in the security check in the South Terminal. Now, the UK's second busiest airport, Gatwick, has two terminals, South, which is used by British Airways, Ryanair, Wizz Air, a number of other airlines, and North Terminal. North Terminal is unaffected except that you can't get there on the train from anywhere because the train station's been closed. What happened was they immediately evacuated the whole of the land side, i.e. the bit before security control, which includes the check-in area. It includes the railway station built into the airport. Trains are running through Gatwick, but they're not stopping there. Loads of people, of course, arriving by road. They're flying off to lovely places in the Mediterranean or across the Atlantic or wherever. They are being kept out of the terminal. So you have this extraordinary situation where people who've already gone through the check are basically sitting there airside waiting for their flights, some of which are still operating. People flying into South Terminal are landing normally. They're going to the stand, but instead of walking out into international arrivals, they're being bussed to the North Terminal, where they're being processed. Of course, that's only designed for one lot of passengers, not two, so things will be getting busy there. And even when you emerge from there, you're thinking, OK, well, let's catch the train to London, Brighton or whatever. Well, you can't. So extremely messy. Happening on a Friday is about the worst possible time that it could happen. And very unfortunately, I fear we are going to see a lot of cancellations building up as passengers simply can't get to their planes. And the response from airlines quite often is, OK, well, we'll just have to cancel some flights and then sort of catch up. But a really messy and distressing situation for tens of thousands of people, James.
And no indication, presumably, of when the authorities at Gatwick expect it to be completed.
OK, well, let me talk through what I imagine will be happening. So, suspicious item. Now, the suspicious items are identified. It might, from time to time, people might accidentally take a sharp knife through or whatever. Normally, that is dealt with quite kind of discreetly. So, whatever it was will have alarmed the authorities sufficiently to take this very drastic action, and there will be a lot of armed police, I imagine, very much involved in clearing things down, but with a zero risk policy. They will simply be wanting to do everything they need to check the individual, to check the baggage, to work out if there's any other accompanying threats, and they will just take their time and do what needs to be done. And unfortunately, it does mean that it's going to be very messy. If you have got a flight booked later, then I'm afraid what the airport is going to say is talk to your airline. What the airline is going to say is, well, we don't know. And so all you can do is really try to get to the airport if you've got a booking as planned. Be prepared for, of course, delays and disruption. And I imagine the bus services which run to and from North Terminal, the EasyJet terminal, are going to be very busy. A quick hint, if you catch a train to Hawley in Surrey, which is open, you can walk to the North Terminal in about 20-25 minutes.
There you go. You see, I told you he was good. In the event of it being, as everyone would hope, peacefully and happily resolved and quickly, how much knock-on effect might there be, Simon, into the weekend?
Very good question. This, of course, is the busiest single runway airport in the world. It requires everything to be running very smoothly at all times to get the sheer number of planes in and out. That hasn't been happening. We're going to see a whole kind of wodge of departures which are going to be either heavily delayed, I fear, or cancelled going out in the middle of the day. That will then build up towards the evening peak when you've got an awful lot of people maybe finishing work, heading for the airport, flying off to a beautiful European city. That could get very messy indeed. In a sense, the one good thing is that the biggest airline at Gatwick, which is EasyJet, is not very affected by this. The vast majority of their flights go from North Terminal. But of course, it's going to be desperately frustrating if people are right this moment trying to get a train to Gatwick. They can't do that. And actually, their plane goes off without them. That's a bit of an issue which is going to be very, very concerning.
That'll be the BBC.
It will.
Simon Calder, thank you very much indeed, the travel correspondent for The Independent, bringing you up to speed there with what we must hope is dealt with happily and quickly. But obviously the disruption is immense now. No rail services calling at Gatwick Airport at all. The South Terminal evacuated completely shortly before 11 o'clock GMT this morning following a security incident. Incoming planes still landing, as you heard. So watch this space or the social media of the airport or the airlines or the websites, all the usual things. But if you've got something planned today and it involves the South Terminal at Gatwick Airport, the news is pretty bad, I'm afraid. 20 to 12 is the time. Back to the news of the day, which is the call by no fewer than 7 education secretaries to revamp the system. Jessica in Taunton is a maths and physics teacher who finds her own curriculum boring. And I was intrigued by how soon after becoming a teacher you realised that you were bored by what you were teaching.
Well, my original degrees are in chemistry, and then I swapped over to physics because there was a particular school I wanted to work in, and I switched across to physics. So I think, in a way, it's a different way of looking at it. I think I'm a bit more empathetic to children that look at physics and think, oh, good God.
Well, a lot of physics teachers in the other story we covered this week were talking about how they find the curriculum very helpful to the modern world. Yeah, uninspiring, that was the word. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for a start, of the triple, for example, so the students that want to do extra science do triple science, and we do a whole topic on space. Well, I don't know any single child that would not desperately want to do space. Now, there's nothing about space that's not absolutely thrilling. Why is that not in the normal science curriculum, for a start? And secondly, all the stuff, even on the stuff that I teach in space, is about 10 or 15 years too old. I mean, there's no mention of even the James Webb Telescope, and we've had 4 or 5 sets of photographs.
But these are things that would engage them more in the classroom, but not 100%. Necessarily equip them with much that was going to be much use to them afterwards.
No, but I think half the issue is that we're from year 9, which is effectively when they're 14. We're already putting them on the academic track. Well, lots of students don't. That's not what their work life is going to be. So I think they're the two things. What your previous caller said as well. I think a lot of our because our schools have this academic pathway. Fair enough. I understand that's what school really was for. But sure. Ultimately, I think this social contract has broken down. Like they don't leave school now with this, right, this is what you do. You do this, you do this, you do this. And it's when you leave school, this is what you're going to be ill-equipped to you. Well, that's not the case anymore. Very much,
and that's still the message they're getting. So that's a double betrayal. So we're not only ill-equipping them, we're misleading them.
Yes, I think so.
That's interesting.
I mean,
what would you change then? What would you change then? do you think?
Stop having education as a political football. It changes every time there's a new government or a new set of education.
Yeah, but you were also saying it needs to change.
It does.
So you can't, I got you. So, it needs to change.
But what I'm saying with sixth form is that so I'm a sixth form tutor as well, and we help them write their UCAS applications and everything else. But even the teachers are behind the times in terms of what the T-levels are available, what the apprenticeships are, how those apprenticeships work, because there's never a final decision made. We always feel like we're scrabbling to get the information to catch up, because more often than not, the governments don't actually know either.
Yeah, and maybe these are lessons learned the hard way by 7 education secretaries.
Precisely. I don't think anyone. The problem is, like I say, there's no consensus about, these are the pathways, these are the routes that we will provide you to move into to be productively and economically viable.
And to be happier, and to be happier and more fulfilled.
Absolutely.
These are, I think Gemma really brought that home. The idea that you this is a much more than just a qualification-based conversation. And in fact, one of them, Charles Clark, has said that GCSEs are too dominant. Assessment at 16 should be slimmed down. It's unbalanced. Pupils need to study a far broader range of subjects up to 18, and then they'd know more. They'd be more engaged. They'd be more likely to find the thing that gets them out of bed in the mornings, metaphorically speaking. Jessica, thank you. There's always one. And today it's Bruce. So I suggested, in entirely good faith, that studying space at school in Taunton was unlikely to be of enormous use when these young people came to leaving school and looking to make their way in their world. I don't think that was a controversial statement, but here's Bruce. He doesn't actually write actually, but I can hear that the actually is silent on this one, Bruce. Actually, he says, or doesn't, my ex's son loved space and he just got a job at NASA in Houston. Like I said, there's always one.
James O'Brien on LBC.
47 is the time. I'm going all in the next hour on a topic that I teed up for you earlier this week, but which I didn't know I'd have. I didn't know if I'd feel perky enough. I got told off for saying that I was feeling perky by Keith, but I think it's a lovely word, perky. I didn't know if I'd be feeling perky enough after 12 o'clock today to dive into this story, but I am. I'm feeling very perky. I've also got a missing word round for you, one of my favourites in a while. Did I forget the emu earlier in the week? Did I forget the emu? There was an emu in the news earlier this week. I remembered the hamsters, but I may have forgotten the emu, for which I can only apologise. But let me try and find this. So, ready? What word is missing from this headline? Blanks trap 200 German drivers in car park. I'll give you a clue. I'll give you one clue. It's not an emu. I'll give you 2 clues. It's 2 words. So, blanks trap 200 German drivers in car park. I had another one as well, actually, that was a bit more political, would you believe? Got a political one as well. We may do that in the next hour. Speaking of political, I think we'll also be hearing a little bit more about the Reform UK Member of Parliament, and you'll remember that his leader, Nigel Farage, has always been very, very concerned about violence against women, who claimed that he'd been sent to a young offenders institution for simply pushing an ex-girlfriend. The Times newspaper reports today that the truth, as you might expect when dealing with Reform UK, the truth is rather different. We'll find out more about that in the next hour. But for now, blanks trap 200 German drivers in car park. I better not forget what this is, and it's definitely not cauliflowers. How long is that joke? Yeah, Stevie's even added #evergreen to it. 11:49 is the time. Back to school. Nick's in Watford. Nick, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James. Glad to be on. One of your earliest listeners, by the way.
Oh, you? Do you remember Beat the Sweet? Yeah. Do you remember Beat the Sweet?
I do. I think I do, actually. I've been listening to 2005.
2000, yeah, that might have just made the cut. It was a very, very sophisticated game where I used to eat a sweet and then you'd ring in and try and guess what the sweet was.
It. I do remember it.
Go on, where were we? Carry on.
I am. Right, I'm coming from a parent's perspective. I was speaking to my 14-year-old son last night in the car exactly about this.
Yeah.
He is a naturally bright kid, always done well in his studies, but I can sense he's slowly becoming despondent with school. And at first, as the parents do, think, maybe they're hanging around with the wrong kids, now they've gone to high school and whatnot. By the way, he's 13. My wife's going to kill me. He's 13.
What were you like at maths?
That's a good start. Anyway, so he's in the same year anyway. But he keeps saying to me, I'm never going to need any of this stuff. And my general response as a parent, you do your best as you possibly can. It will give you options. It's harder than out there these days. But I feel like I'm slowly losing him. And what's more worrying for me is that in the back of my mind, I kind of agree with him as well. And he challenges me, We went through so many jobs last night, and he was like, well, why do I need that for that then? Why do I need that for that? He even mentioned pi. And I was like, 3.14159266. It's one of my party tricks. I actually remember all of it. Yeah. But who cares? And they teach the same thing year on year, regardless of the student's
teaching
interest.
Stuff that you studied back in the day, without recognising that a lot of them, we still live on the same planet, but we live in a different world.
Exactly that. Exactly.
So what would he rather? What do you think? What do you as dad, or maybe he's told you, but what do you think might engage him more?
Well, look, the modern stuff as well. They don't teach anything like AI, do they? Or look, there's some kids that don't really. They're not. There's too much emphasis on maths and English, but sometimes they might want to embrace the arts a bit more.
Yeah.
Like Duke of Edinburgh, for example, the awards is a very good. It gives you life skills, but you have to pay for it as well. So not everyone can afford that.
Yeah.
And like, for example, in my job, I've been selling property for 20 years, and I'm staggered by the buyer's lack of knowledge when it comes to arranging mortgages.
Yeah.
Stuff like Martin Lewis does. Why don't we teach stuff like that?
Well, he says that. Martin would be absolutely foursquare behind you on that. Well, actually, he'd probably be a few yards in front of you. He's been calling for this for years, and putting it on the curriculum and doing it properly and giving people the skills just to navigate everything from, as you say, from a pay slip to a mortgage application, and to know what interest rates are, and to do all of the things that are intrinsic to surviving in the modern world, but which no one at school ever really gets taught. I guess that's part of what they're talking about. AI as well. It's a tricky one though. So I mean, some of it, and I'm just a few years ahead of you on this one. So I don't take what I say, take it all with a pinch of salt. So some of it is critical thinking. So you can't immediately describe the application that this knowledge would have in the working place. But critical thinking is useful because it means you don't fall for lies. Yes. It means you don't fall for nonsense. And as you've just acknowledged yourself, sometimes arts don't have an immediately applicable professional use, but they just make you a happier, better person, don't they, sometimes? But not the stuff on a science or a maths curriculum that's got no real place in the modern world.
No, there should be more kind of jobs-based learning. For example, we've got a friend who's he's a deputy editor of a big paper, and he's a good friend of ours, and my son looks up to him and says, "Oh, I want to be like a sports journalist." But there's no practical way. I say to him, you're covering football every night, for example. You have to work every night. You work till 10 o'clock. You've got to write something very quickly. What do I need for that? Well, English, obviously, but there's no practical learning when it comes to that. My wife's a teacher. Well, my wife works in a school. Sorry, she's not a teacher. Right. She's going to kill me again.
Twice now, mate. Do you want to go for that trick?
She works in a school, and she keeps saying that they're losing teachers as well, by the droves, and I just think the curriculum, like the previous caller said, it's boring, and that you need. And my son, I think, he engages more when there's a fun teacher. We all do. I used to as well. When there was a fun teacher who could make the teachings fun, but the curriculum doesn't allow for that.
Matter.
Really,
make it matter. That's all. And that's what Jessica was talking about being bored herself. So having to, strain every sinew to make it matter, make it interesting. Make it interesting, you make it matter. I don't think anyone's going to disagree, except possibly Michael Gove. I can't imagine anybody with the experiences you've got, or the teachers have got, or other parents have got, coming away from this story thinking, it's all a load of nonsense. It's really obvious, the more you talk about it, that lads like yours, even if they were to get straight 9s in their GCSEs, it wouldn't actually mean that they'd assembled a bunch of things that were going to be really useful to them 10 years later.
No, exactly. James, if the teachers are bored, then imagine the students. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. Do you want to know something funny that happened in the middle of your call?
Go on.
Just in case anyone watching on YouTube thinks I was rude. Hi, by the way, to YouTubers. Don't forget to hit that button. So did you hear me say at the end of when Simon Calder's phone rang at the end of my interview with him, and I said that'll be the BBC?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, it will. As you were speaking, I glanced to the screen at my right, and there was Simon Calder popping up on the BBC. So he wasn't even joking. There you go. That's the media crash course for your 14-year-old son. What possible benefit it would be to him, I do not know. But there it is. Thank you, mate, and take care. And thanks for listening. Thanks for being here for the long haul. There should be some sort of award. There should be a special thing. Stephen is in Stroud. Oh, hang on. I've got some more details from Sussex Police. Police were which I will read to you now. Police were called to the South Terminal at Gatwick Airport at 8:20 a.m. on Friday, the 22nd of November. That's today, obviously, following the discovery of a suspected prohibited item in luggage. To ensure the safety of the public, staff and other airport users, a security cordon has been put in place whilst the matter is dealt with. As a precaution, an EOD, that's an explosive ordnance disposal, team is being deployed to the airport. This is causing significant disruption, and some roads around the South Terminal have been closed. We'd advise the public to avoid the area where possible. A moment, perhaps, to reflect upon the men and women that run towards these kind of situations, even as the rest of us are being urged to move away. I think some of the coverage of our police in recent months has been pretty hideous, or some of the condemnation and criticism, and that is a timely moment, perhaps, to reflect upon the risks that they may face every single time they turn up for work in the morning. 11:57 is the time. Last word on this to Stephen, who's in Stroud. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I think we're just reflecting on listening to the conversation for the last few minutes. I think actually what you just said, actually, it kind of was a missed opportunity in 2010 with Michael Gove and his curriculum. I was a head teacher then, and I've retired now, but I've recently.
Okay.
And so I've seen those curriculum changes, but I think the curriculum isn't fit for purpose, and I think that we had a chance perhaps back then to do something about that, because all the 14 to 19 stuff was binned back then, and we've lost the opportunity. So we've got a curriculum where a good chunk of the kids we have don't actually aren't being prepared for the sort of careers they might have. I mean, it does a reasonably good job, I think, to prepare people for A-level and then also for A-level and university for those wanting to do that, but not really for other stuff.
So, preparing them for education, preparing them for more education.
Yeah, and that's the sort of curriculum we have.
And also presuming that they want to do more education rather than move into more vocational training or work itself when they hit 18 years old.
Yeah, and then it doesn't do that. It never really has done that. And there's been chances and opportunities for it to do it. We haven't taken them.
Why not? Why do you think? I know that's a big, far too big a question for you to answer in the 30 seconds left, but just a sort of early foray into that territory.
Because I think you need the consensus about what our curriculum and education is about, and every 5 years or 10 years or a bit longer we have a change of government, and they can easily and readily use education politically, and they just choose to do it. It's an easy thing to say, look what we're doing, look what we're achieving, look what we're changing.
Yeah, you're right. So a kind of change for the change's sake, just like when a boss comes into a new place and makes changes that nobody wants or welcomes because they haven't got the confidence to sit there and actually do nothing.
Yeah, and it's ideologically driven as well. And I would say just one last thing, that the consequences are significant. So we've got suspension rates going up, exclusion rates going up.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, that's
all these problems. And
Sheila
that's because we've got kids who aren't relating to the curriculum.
Listen to that. Joining the dots perfectly. Sheila was talking about that yesterday. Absolutely, it's going to be linked, isn't it? And you know.
Linked.
Thank you, mate. Thank you, Stephen. You brought it in bang on time as well, which is something I very rarely do. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Right, okay. I've got to provide you with the answer to this question, which I'll do immediately after the news. Blanks trap 200 German drivers in car park. And then we're going to have a go at a topic that Nick will appreciate this. I could have been doing when he first started listening to this programme 15 years ago. And unlike most of the conversations that we have together, I'm none the wiser. So I told you yesterday about an artwork comprising a banana fixed to the wall with some duct tape being sold at auction for $6.2 million. That's £5 million in British money. And I haven't got the first idea how that happens.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:03. The answer, I've got to find some ones that aren't animal-based or creature-based? The answer is pigeons. Well, actually, more pertinently, pigeon droppings. I love the idea of someone just tuning in now. Oh, it's 12 o'clock. I've just finished a meeting. I'll put James on. What is he talking about? Pigeon droppings. I will reveal the context on this occasion, but frankly, you should be listening from 10 o'clock till 1 o'clock every day. I don't really like people who dip in and out. What do you think I am? A sherbet fountain? So, pigeon droppings trap 200 German drivers in car park. Hundreds of Germans spent a night trapped in an underground car park after an avalanche of pigeon dung short-circuited the exit gate. Times newspaper doesn't have a great palette of words to choose from in the second paragraph, and so they go there. The poo caused a malfunction in a control box at the car park in Stuttgart, which triggered fire alarms and the closure of a security gate. Some 200 drivers were trapped in the car park for 2 hours as the fire alarm was not transmitted to local firefighters. So, I don't know how bad your day is going, but it could probably be worse. And speaking of worse, I want to read you an excerpt from a review of a new book, and I want you to try to guess whose book it is, all right? Are you ready? And I'll give you a clue. It's not mine. We witness all the classic psychological weakness of the conspiracy theorist here. The breakdown in epistemological safeguards that see someone's judgment corrode once they begin to think in this way. The first is cui bono, or who benefits. The author asks this repeatedly, as conspiracy theorists always do. But sometimes people benefit from things that they were not responsible for. If an athlete benefits from their competitor spraining their ankle, it does not mean that they perpetrated it. The second is that, quotes, everything is connected, end quotes. Conspiracy theorists live in a world without coincidence or luck, in which every event must contribute to their central thesis. So the Queen's death must be connected to Johnson's downfall. Mirza''s resignation on a completely unrelated matter must have been the, quotes, the starting gun firing, end quotes. So whose book do you think is being reviewed here? And to be honest, if you don't get this right, then I'm going to pack up and go home. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. Right, so this conversation, this was one of my most seminal experiences in this job. Well, one of my early seminal experiences in this job. Because I still don't see where the line is between taking the mickey and understanding. And often, if a story lends itself to taking the mickey, these days I try and find a slightly less predictable response to it. You know, I'd sort of try and work out, I guess that's the problem with culture war, isn't it, and woke watch, is that the stuff that people who told you Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy, Brexit would be great for business, waiting lists in the NHS would get shorter, austerity was a necessary response to the banking crisis, that bankers shouldn't have been blamed for the banking crisis, that Liz Truss was an economic genius. Those people, when they see a story about what they like to call wokeness, they can't resist the urge to take the mickey. And I have obviously realised in recent years that they're deeply dishonest and often very, very ignorant, but always wrong. So a story that just says, come and take the mickey out of me, now makes my antennae twitch a bit. And I'm sort of thinking, well, I don't want to take the mickey out of this because it is being deployed ignorantly by idiots. But this story here, eh? So I don't get it. I just don't get it. And I am so au fait with the Emperor's New Clothes that I really worry that I can't get it. Because I can't be the kid. We'd all be the kid in the crowd saying the Emperor's naked. Who would be left? What am I talking about? You may wonder. Quite rightly. I do sometimes. An artwork comprising a banana fixed to the wall with some duct tape. I don't know if you even get a definite article in that sense. It's fixed to a wall, isn't it? Because it moves around, this artwork. It's been displayed in various different places. So it's just fixed to a wall, not the wall. It's a banana fixed to a wall with some duct tape. It's not April the 1st. Has been sold at auction for $6.2 million at Sotheby's in New York. It's called Comedian. It's by the Italian conceptual artist Maurizio Catalan, and it was bought by a Chinese cryptocurrency entrepreneur called Justin Sun. The upper estimate prior to Wednesday's auction was $1.5 million, which means at least two people were prepared to pay several $1 million for this. Well, I can't say banana, but I can say banana. You say banana. Well, actually, I say banana as well. But artwork. You say banana, I say artwork. Because you wouldn't not pay $6.2 million for a banana, even if I threw in some duct tape and a wall. In fact, and a small house with walls in it that you could stick the banana to with duct tape. It would not be. You would not pay $6.2 million for it. In the coming days, Mr. Sun said, this is the banana buyer, in the coming days, I will personally eat the banana as part of this unique artistic experience. So, unsurprisingly, we learn that the banana in the artwork is not the original banana. It has already been eaten before. The piece, as I say, is called Comedian. Twice the work has been ripped off the walls of galleries and devoured by pranksters since it was first exhibited 5 years ago. So, I mean, I know what you're thinking, because you, like me, are a fan of one of the finest British television programmes, one of the finest television programmes ever made. And you're immediately thinking, well, hang on a minute. If they've ripped the banana that is stuck to the wall with duct tape off the wall, then they have almost certainly rendered the duct tape unreusable, if that's a word. So I would wager that not only is the banana not the original banana, but the duct tape is not the original duct tape either. All together now? Trigger's broom. Except Trigger was not trying to sell his broom for $6.2 million. Trigger's broom, if you're not familiar with the story, involved one of the finest characters in Only Fools and Horses, one of the finest sitcoms. And, of course, you can listen to my full disclosure interview with the absolutely wonderful David Jason on the Global Player. Happened about a month ago. And he had a broom. As he worked as a council road sweeper. And he received an award, I think, if memory serves, for having kept his broom in action for a very long time. A sort of long service award for his broom. And the joke was that he'd changed the handle half a dozen times and he'd changed the head of the broom a dozen times, or I made up the numbers. So it's a huge philosophical question. Is that his broom? What is that broom in relation to the original broom? He can't have received an award for not replacing his... So he'd had the same broom for 20 years, but he'd changed the handle 10 times and he'd changed the broom head 20 times. So he hadn't had the same broom for 20. So that's just an aside. That's not the central thrust of this inquiry. It sold for $120,000 a few years ago, after which a performance artist called David DeTuna, a bit fishy, he ripped the banana from the wall in Miami and ate it after it had been sold. He called his act Hungry Artist because he said, and you might want to write this down, I was hungry and I just ate it. In 2023, the artwork, except was it the artwork, given that the banana is not the same banana and the duct tape is not the same duct tape, but it was stuck to a wall in Seoul in South Korea when an art student ate it. According to the terms of the auction, what Mr. Sun has actually bought is a certificate of authenticity signed by the artist. And I don't quite understand it. The banana needs to be regularly replaced before it rots. Back to Trigger. But the 64-year-old artist has said that his banana piece is, quotes, not a joke. It was a sincere commentary. Listen, it was a sincere commentary and a reflection on what we value. At art fairs, speed and business reign. So I saw it like this. If I had to be at a fair, I could sell a banana, like others sell their paintings. I could play within the system, but with my rules. Do you get it? Because I don't. So I don't want to be po-faced about it. But I am more than prepared to end this conversation thinking, oh, okay, yeah, all right, I get it now. Do you see what I mean? I'm not going to be summarily dismissive. There's no point in having this conversation, I don't think. It's why I was talking earlier about the temptation to take the mickey out of things that you don't understand. It's a very human reaction. The less you understand it, the more tempting it is to take the mickey out of, particularly in the context of wokeness, if it seems to involve respecting people that you've been conditioned to despise. So I don't want to poo-poo this. I don't want to be a po-faced poo-pooer. But I am not joking when I tell you that it seems to me to be absolutely ridiculous. And the question is not, because fair play to the fella who's walked away with $6.2 million, although it wouldn't be the artist, it would have been the last person to buy it. Fair play to everyone who's made a profit out of this. What I would like you to do, what I would like you to tell me, is why how it could be worth that sort of money. That's what I'm interested in. The nature of art may be a side order this hour. But how can it be worth that much money? And don't say because someone is prepared to pay it. It's got to be bigger than that. Not least because it was an auction, which means there was more than one person prepared to pay it. How can this be worth that sort of money? What is happening here? 0345 6060973. All right. On a rather more serious note, as you know, we've been reporting all morning that Sussex Police have confirmed an explosive ordnance disposal team has been deployed to Gatwick Airport, where a large part of the south terminal has been evacuated. We will obviously be keeping you right up to date on this programme with any newly emerging details. It's 12:14.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 12. And I mean, maybe that's part of the answer. The fact that you and I can't understand it. How a banana, a normal banana, you could have picked it up from Morrison's last night and you taped it to a wall, and because you're a hotshot artist, someone has just paid $6 million for it. Just explain that to me in a way that makes me feel a bit less baffled, all right? And as I say, I'm not being contemptuous. They're just normal bananas. They're just innocent bananas. Dave's in Warwick. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello, Dave.
Long-time listener, still here. Great show as always.
Top man, thank you.
I personally think, and it's just a thought, that it's an event. It becomes an event. If it was just a regular artist and he'd put a banana with duct tape on the wall, well, so what?
Sure.
It's kind of been done before. But in this case, it's a known artist, a very rich artist, and it's been bought by a very rich crypto guy.
Yeah.
So it's between two celebrities now. It's not just an artistic moment. It's in the press. It's everywhere. It is an event. And it's similar a little bit, I think. Like, do you remember when Banksy sold that piece at auction and then it shredded?
Yes.
In front of a whole stunned audience? Well, no one's talking about the piece. Most people can't even probably remember which particular Banksy piece it was. What they do remember is the shredding of that piece, and it becomes an event. Damien Hirst kind of did it, but I think it goes back further. And the example I sort of used to your producer was, you may have heard of him. There was an American performance artist called Jim Vine, and he did one of his many famous pieces was he'd be on stage with a blank canvas and a bucket of paint, and he'd drink the paint and then throw himself through the canvas. That was the piece.
Are you sure that wasn't Russ Abbott?
Russ Abbott did many great things, but that might not be the originator.
Showing my age there. But I could then buy the canvas, could I, or not?
No, you paid for the event. It's possible that he did sell the canvas to people. I'm not sure on that.
But this was a Sotheby's auction, and I think you're closer to understanding it than I am, for the record. But I could now own what was left of that Banksy painting. In fact, I think it went up in value immediately because it had imbued the event into the tangible object.
Absolutely.
But there's no tangible object here because of the ship of Theseus or Trigger's broom, whichever you prefer.
But the thing is, it becomes possibly a kind of like, it's a bit Walter Benjamin, art in the age of mechanical reproduction, transferred to the fruit side of things. But the owner...
It's a seed, I think.
Yeah, that's the one. I think what it could be, the rich guy who's owned it, obviously now his crypto company is also infinitely more famous than it was.
Yeah.
But he's already said the first thing he's going to do is eat the banana.
Yeah.
And then he's going to obviously replace that banana with a different banana. So it's like, from an art question, is that the original piece, or is that a piece that will continue to live?
And the fact that he has,
I don't know.
The fact that he has the certificate from the artist saying that this is the authentic banana duct taped to a wall moves it into territory a bit similar to, and this is where it gets possibly even more interesting. What were those things called that they were selling a few years ago, where you could buy Andy Murray?
That's right, the digital art.
Yeah, what was it called?
Non-disposable rubbish or something.
It had an F in it. What was the F for? Fungible, non-fungible token.
Yeah. And look where that.
But that fell apart.
Went.
Yeah, the bottom completely fell out. So all these people who paid a couple of $1 million to have an authenticated picture of someone winning something signed by the person that won it, that's now worth nothing. I think the fella who went to jail for trying to
absolutely right
butcher the medicine market was one of the. So why is this any different?
Well, the difference with this is, I mean, I don't work in digital areas, so
But I think it's the same. I think if everybody woke up tomorrow and decided this was worth buttons, this fella would not be able to sell it on, even with the. That's true of everything.
Isn't it interesting that sort of the fungal digital art?
Yeah.
How big that suddenly was, and then it crashed. And isn't it interesting that the digital street music market, which was so huge, is now kind of flatlining, and there's a huge return to physical media like vinyl albums, CDs. Yeah. People. That's the great thing. As you know, you walk into an art gallery, and you walk up to a really fantastic piece, and you can see the brush strokes. You can see the paint in the different directions. You can see the painter in front of that piece creating it, and you're there hundreds of years later, looking at this incredible piece of art, and it still moves you, and it's physical, something you can touch. There was a fantastic Andy Warhol exhibition I saw it in Edinburgh years ago, and it was one that had those the blow-up helium balloons, the silver helium balloons.
Yes.
And there's obviously you've seen there. I can't remember what the name of that particular installation is, but it was those, and they were in one big room, and you could just go in and throw them in the air and play with them, and you were interacting, and it was alive.
But you wouldn't pay £9 million for it.
Some people would.
So, yeah, and that's the mystery. Maybe that's the mystery. When you said that, here's an interesting thing about how the world turns. When you said that about tangible music, physical entities that have music on them, I was trying to find something somebody sent me this morning about precisely that subject, but Blue Sky is now popular enough for me not to be able to find any messages on it specifically in the same way that all other social media became over the last few years. So even though I'm now on Blue Sky, I can't find the thing it was someone really cool writing an article about why Spotify and other streaming services have spoiled something. It wasn't just about the pleasure of owning an LP record, but it was also about the pleasure of discovering things which you can't do in the digital world in the way that you do in the material world. That was brilliant, Dave. What do you do? How are you? I mean, you didn't just come up with all that on the spur of the moment, did you?
I'm an artist.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
Are you
talking to you?
Are you exhibiting anytime soon? Do you want to have an advert?
The plan is to do an exhibit because there's so much work now. It's just about trying to find out where to put it on, and I just don't know. Okay. But I'm on. There's a site called Curator Space.
Yep.
Which is where lots of people can put their art on, so you can go and see it. So I've got a page on that, and it's you go on Curator Space, and if you just put in Dave Mitchell 2 L's, you'll find it. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that.
Actually, I'll have a look at it during the next news bulletin. Cheers, Dave. That was really helpful, and the perfect illustration of why it is somehow simultaneously silly and serious. So if the little boy in the crowd shouted, "The Emperor's got no clothes on," and you had to explain, actually, that's not the point when it comes to this $6 million banana, what would you say? 0345 6060973. 25 minutes after 12. I think we can all agree that there better be inheritance tax to pay on this banana. Am I right? Marcus is in Brighton. Marcus, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello, Marcus.
I'm a big fan of Maurizio Catalan. Can I just say before I forget, he actually once did an art piece where he taped a security guard to a wall with his permission.
That's quite funny as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't be able to buy that, would you?
Well, no, you wouldn't be able to buy that. I suppose you could hire the security guard, but he's also had paid someone to be himself.
He's playing with our imaginations in a way that all artists do.
Absolutely, he's a mega star of art. I mean, I really love the guy. And the other thing, I'll give you some of the other playful things he did. He once, in one of his first exhibitions, he just put a sign up and said, "I'll be right back."
I like him already.
Yeah. He also.
I'm going to do that on Monday's show. I'm going to. How long do you reckon that'll last? I'll come on air at 10 o'clock and say, "Talk among yourselves. I'll be right back." And then he disappeared. Did he?
Yeah, they just didn't. And then one time he actually went down the road and was supposed to do an exhibition. So he went down the road and took someone else's work and just stuck it back in his gallery. And then he's done things like he once made this little figure of a crouching man. It was like which incidentally, he didn't actually make the sculpture himself, but it's still his own sculpture. And this is a thing with we were talking about, you talk about Trigger's broom and everything.
Yeah.
Is the fact of the matter is art has always been made by other people. Like, when you have an architect, say like a Le Corbusier house, or he's not, the architect hasn't actually physically built it. So what as you've said, you're buying the license.
The idea, you buy the idea, the imagined.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the thing, there are artworks that have gone for millions of pounds, and quite frankly, I'd rather have a banana on my wall, because every day I'd be looking at it, it'd be making me question about value. I'd be laughing, and I know that no one else can own that banana. I own the license to do it. Damien Hirst.
Tell me about that bit. Tell me about that bit there. Why does it have to be that banana? So if I sold you one now for, say, I don't know, I'll do you one for 500 grand if you want, if you ask me nicely, and you stuck that one to your wall, would you not look at that and laugh, and look at that and think? And
I would actually. The problem is it's a James O'Brien banana, which has a lot of.
All right, I'll throw in a certificate. I'll throw in a certificate as well, and a free paperback.
Do you know what? I'm bloody divided, because I like Maurizio Catalan, but I like the idea of having a James O'Brien banana. It appeals to my art.
All right, well, imagine it was someone else then. If it was like literally just straight out of Sainsbury's, or it was Keith's banana. Would you still?
No,
you wouldn't, would you? You wouldn't look at it.
It's not his idea. The problem is it's not. It's the same as Banksy. When people go around the street and they take works off the wall in a town or something, and they try and sell it in a gallery, Banksy says it's not a Banksy anymore.
Yeah.
Because it's the concept, it's the idea as well.
Although I suppose I could argue with Banksy, because people, as long as they've managed not to do so without committing criminal damage or a form of theft, you can still hang what he did on your wall and be glad to have it. But you're about to say you can do that with the banana as well?
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is the thing, really. So,
I'm going to ask you as well if you want an advert for your because Eleanor said that you're an art podcaster, and Sarah's been in touch to say I love this caller. He shows that art is accessible to all.
Yeah, that's really my mission. I co-host an art podcast called Modern Art is Rubbish.
Well, hang on a minute. You've just been telling me how wonderful it is.
No, it's art, isn't it? We're trying to be ironic.
You're messing with my mind, aren't you? That's what it is, you see.
Yeah.
I'm getting it. I don't think I would ever be in a space to spend $6 million on a banana, but I'm getting it. It is that bit he said there is I would look at it and laugh. You would. And somehow the knowledge that it's the original one, and being a fan of the artist, and so having a relationship with him, which again is completely intangible. It's completely in the spirit world, if you like. You don't have a relationship with him in real life. You may not have met him, but you know his work, like Marcus knows his work. Then you appreciate his mischief. You love his mischief. And every time you look at that banana, you're imbued with his sense of mischief. And that is why it's worth ... Gosh, that was such an interesting call. I shall have a listen to Marcus's podcast this weekend. It's coming up to 12:30. I'm going to have a look at Dave's art during the news bulletin. As we have been reporting, though, a bomb disposal police unit has been sent to Gatwick Airport after a suspected prohibited item was found in luggage. After the news, I'll be joined by Josh Draper, LBC's reporter in the southeast, with the very, very latest news on that. But first, Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12, scenes of relative chaos. I mean, calm chaos, if there's such a thing. Enormous tailbacks now and crowds of people at Gatwick Airport, where, as you heard earlier, the South Terminal has been largely evacuated after a suspicious object was found in luggage earlier this morning. Joseph Draper is LBC's reporter in the southeast and joins me now with the very latest. Joseph, what can you tell us?
Afternoon, James. Well, as you say, there's a lot of disruption, a lot of anxiety, I think, at Gatwick this afternoon. South Terminal, of course, evacuated because of what police are saying was the discovery of a suspected prohibited item in luggage. Now, we know the bomb disposal squad is on its way. And just to give you an idea of some of the confusion and some of the fear there in the South Terminal, Lawrence is stuck there at the moment with his family.
This is a really important trip. I need to be on this trip to Portugal to fly on to Dubai for my next stop. So it's really important I get out of this airport hopefully soon. I'm in coffee, no big deal. And then suddenly one of the staff ran over and said, "You've got to evacuate now." Getting our stuff together. And then the whole of the main terminal just emptied really quickly. Some people were running, some were just walking quickly. And then we were one of the last groups out. And they had a lot of the people who needed assistance, who were in the wheelchairs, who were kind of frustrated because they were stuck and no one was getting them out quick enough.
Now, we know around 300 flights were due to leave Gatwick today, and that's around 60,000 seats. And we know some of these people have been left sat in planes on the runway, struggling with the cold weather today. So depending on what we're dealing with here, James, it could be a lot more disruption in the hours ahead.
And I suppose it ends when it ends. So as soon as it is over, hopefully without any further events, then it will be over. In other words, the authorities aren't going to be able to say we expect to be clear in 2 hours or anything like that. People are just going to have to wait and see.
Absolutely. There's no estimate of time and people are just hanging on, hoping they can get on their way. Some of them, on business trips, important things they have to get to. But really, there are very few details at the moment that either the authorities or we can give them. And as that is going to cause, as you can understand, a lot of frustration, I think, a lot of anxiety.
Well, all the more reason to stay tuned to LBC, or of course to be keeping an eye on the social media accounts of Gatwick Airport and various airlines. Joseph Draper there, LBC's reporter in the southeast, with the latest on that evacuation at Gatwick and the continuing disruption, I suppose. The idea that people will not know whether they're going to get away at all, and that will kick on into the rest of the day and possibly the weekend. I don't know. That's the whole point about these kind of things, and it's a reflection of how frustrating it must be. There's a live blog on the LBC website that is probably your best place for constant updates and getting the very latest information as and when it appears. Lots of you, like me, enjoyed looking at Dave Mitchell's art during the news headlines there. Catherine says it's absolutely fabulous. And my reply to anyone who looks at modern art and says I could do that is, and yet you're not. And that there is something in the middle of that, isn't there? And yet you're not. But how can a banana be worth $6 million is a question that I don't think it's foolish to ask. But having spoken to our first two callers, Dave and what was the name of the fella in Brighton? I'm going, Marcus, was it? Yeah, Marcus in Brighton, presenter of the Modern Art is Rubbish podcast, no less. I am beginning to see the light, but I'm not all the way there yet. Paul's in Camden. Paul, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, well, thanks for taking my call. And first-time caller, listen to you all the time.
Thank
whilst
you.
I sort of pound out articles on art. I'm the editor of Art List, which is the first sort of fully fledged online publication in the UK.
How exciting. I'm very honoured that you have me on in the background while you're doing important work.
I do. I listen to you every day.
Wow.
And I have your book. I bought your book.
This is ridiculous. I shall give you a signed certificate of authenticity and it'll suddenly be worth 100 times more than you paid for it. So what can you help me with on this one?
Interestingly enough, I don't know if somebody else covered this before I tuned in, but there are more than one of these out there.
No, they didn't.
Basically, he did an edition of them, and there are four other editions of the banana, or the certificate of authenticity, whatever you want to call it. And there are 2 artist proofs. So there are 6 of them floating around out there that can be sold separately.
Well, the only thing that matters then is the certificate, because if I had bought one of these, I could keep it in a safe, and only when I wanted to show it or sell it would I then assemble another version of it myself. I wouldn't need to get the artist to do it.
No, you don't need the artist to do it. There are specific instructions that come along with the authenticity certificate.
Okay.
So basically, they will tell you how many millimeters of gaffer tape to use and the color and ripeness of the banana.
I mean, it's unlikely that he's going to come around and check, like a sort of banana police.
No, but I mean, it's a pretty simple thing to put together. And, this whole thing dates back to Marcel Duchamp.
Go on.
Who was really the creator or the inventor of conceptual art. He's the one who took a urinal and signed it Armat in 1916. So this has been going on for a very, very long time. And I would say that Marcel Duchamp, if he were to sell one of those urinals, and there are a few of them out there, they probably would go for about the same amount of money as Catalan's banana.
Well, I'm getting ever closer. Didn't Picasso have a problem with Marcel Duchamp? Didn't they?
Well, they're the split. Basically, They were both working at the same time. Picasso, made wonderful figurative paintings, created Guernica, which and was quite a political commentary, using art to disseminate views, basically political views. Picasso was an ardent communist, for example, and the Nazis couldn't touch him. He stayed in Paris throughout the war, even though he created things like Guernica.
So when you talk about conceptual art, is it as simple as saying, well, it made you think, and therefore it's art?
Yes, and a lot of it is about your interpretation, your subjective interpretation of what art is. And art is basically, if I say it's art, and I'm a trained artist, and Catalan, believe me, he went to art college, and he's a trained guy, very sus in his making. But, whatever he's created, he has said, well, this is art. This is what I'm presenting as art. So it's art.
And he wouldn't, if this had been his debut piece, it would have been unlikely to secure quite the attention and the price tag. I don't think
no one would have noticed it.
No, exactly that. So it's all linked. It's all linked to the intangible. It's all linked to the intangible. It's linked to reputation. It's linked to track record. It's linked to concept. It's linked to idea. It's linked to everything it's linked to is in the ethereal world, except the banana and the piece of tape.
Basically, and that's the only tangible that he's showing you. But first of all, it's called comedian.
That's quite beautiful when you start thinking about it in this way, isn't it?
It's quite funny.
Yeah. Yeah, beautifully
and he's got
funny.
A great sense of humour.
Yes, it's called comedian, which again is intangible.
Exactly.
That's nomenclature. That's not something you can touch or feel or.
Exactly. Did you also know that I don't know if you missed this? He's the one who did the gold toilet that was stolen out of Blenheim Palace.
This story gets better and better. I think they recovered that, didn't they?
No, they never recovered it.
Is it still missing? So as the editor. As the editor of Art List, what's your theory on that? Was it just to be melted down, do you think, or would some?
They caught the people, but they never.
They never recovered the toilet. So where will it be? In a bunker in Switzerland somewhere, where a mega billionaire can sit on it.
No, they turned it back into gold and sold it a long time ago.
But that's the opposite, because that's got the tangible worth. But of course, it's a sign of how active this fellow's imagination is. I've done a bit of research. You are Paul Carter Robinson.
That's right.
The editor of Art List. I love that. The first sort of fully formed online art magazine. It's fantastic to find out who's listening to the show on a day like today. Complete change of pace next, although we will return to this story, I think. I don't know if you remember when one of the new MPs in the Reform Party turned out to have served time for beating up a woman and claimed that all he'd done was push her. I found myself thinking at the time, that seems, I mean, really, would you get 3 weeks in a youth offenders institution for just pushing somebody, for just pushing an ex-girlfriend? And the mother of the ex-girlfriend was pretty adamant that that is not what had happened at all. But as we've established many times in the past, I'm not really a proper journalist. If I had been a proper journalist, I'd have investigated it to see whether or not it is true. Happily, George Greenwood is not only a proper journalist, but the investigations reporter at the Times, and he has been investigating it. The MP of whom we speak is a former banker called James McMurdoch. George, thank you for your time. What have you found?
So, again, after that story in the Mail, I made an application to the courts for the original court record of his conviction. As you say, it seemed unlikely that somebody would be put in a custodial sentence for just pushing someone. And due to sort of slowness in the courts, it's taken a few months for us to get to the stage where we can see that document. But yesterday there was a hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court, and our application was granted. And we were given this very, very brief snippet called the Court Register Extract of the original offence. But what that revealed was that the custodial sentence was given specifically for Mr. McMurdoch repeatedly kicking the girlfriend. And that is different from what, obviously, just pushing someone.
Very different from what he sought to describe as a teenage indiscretion.
Well, that is the crux of the story, and I put this to him last night to see if he had any comment, but he hasn't come back to me yet with any explanation of the difference between the two.
I don't suppose there's any way of establishing whether or not the Reform Party, was actually made aware of this conviction before he was selected as a candidate. I know that they said that he was, but between you and me, George, and the fireplace, that one tickled my interest as well.
Well, I mean, they said to the Mail back in July when the first details of this emerged that they were made aware. And they said that he was, that basically they thought people can change and rehabilitate. But the issue here seems to be the disjunct between, pushing someone over and basically kicking them. And it's not clear, it may be that he told Reform, the conviction, but not kicking. I don't know. I don't have the records. But, that's the question for them. I put this to them again last night saying, did he inform you of the nature of defence? And again, I haven't had a response from them as to exactly, what they were told before his candidacy went forward.
Because the young lady's mother was fairly clear at the time that she had been left in particular distress, which added to the sense that Mr. McMurdoch was perhaps being a little bit economical with the actuality.
Well, I mean, that was the reason for the application, really, is that when you've got one person saying one thing and one person saying another, documents are often the best way of getting to the truth. And actually having the contemporaneous record is the best possible version of the truth you can get something like this. And luckily enough, that had been retained in the court record, and we're able to access that to tell the story.
It's great work. And just, attendant to this, and you've touched on it as well, why were Essex police so reluctant to release detail on this?
I honestly don't know.
Nor do I.
At the time, I sort of made two requests. I put this request to the courts into the copy of the court records, and an FOI request into Essex Police for any case files they had left from the time. And they refused to give me anything saying, that Mr. McMurdoch had a right to privacy, and that disclosure of this kind of record could impede crime fighting, which seems very odd, which is why I've appealed it. They've then not responded to my appeal within the the rules state you have to do it on 40 working days. They've not done that. So now the Information Commission is looking into this, and they'll have to issue a ruling.
Well, I'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep in touch. George, thank you very much.
Maybe more, but we don't know, and we're waiting for the regulator to issue a ruling on this.
And still waiting for Mr. McMurdoch to get back to you as well, himself.
Yes, indeed. We sent them sort of a fulsome request for comment, and he's not come back yet.
George Greenwood, investigations reporter at The Times. A particularly interesting story, given that Reform leader Nigel Farage is so outspoken about the threat posed to women by immigrants. So, interesting bit of juggling being undertaken there. 12:47 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are also, given the seriousness of the conversation I just had with George at The Times, we're still talking bananas.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:50 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Before I tell you who that book review involved, you might be able to work it out, though, because he has quite a distinctive voice, but otherwise I would say you'll never guess who this is.
One of the things that you write so beautifully, and your stuff is so fun to read, but you write about Trump. Quote, the way that you build a truly vicious nationalist movement is to wed a relatively small core of belligerent idiots to a much larger group of opportunists and spineless fellow travelers whose primary function is to turn a blind eye to things. We may not have that many outright Nazis in America, but we have plenty of cowards and bootlickers, and once those fleshy dominoes start tumbling into the Trump camp, the game is up. When you talk about fleshy dominoes, Chris Christie comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly.
That's Robert F. Kennedy there, describing people who fall into Trump's camp before he became a person who fell into Trump's camp. It still fascinates me. You never stop asking the questions about how what we thought were normal standards of political engagement can be so completely traduced. It is extraordinary, isn't it? Robert Kennedy Jr., obviously. It is 12:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Back to bananas. Jack's in Padstow. Are you bringing a chef's perspective to this?
I am. I am going to bring a chef. So I just to preface this with saying...
Even you lot wouldn't charge $6 million for a banana down in Padstow, would you?
Inflation has been quite tough over the last few years, and the baked-in Brexit implications. But it might be a bit tough for us for a banana split. But my initial thoughts on this, before I start wincing on about bananas, is I think, for me, it's a crypto guy, and it's like an NFT, and he or she is probably going to try and prove in the future that real art can be a token, and then, because they're probably speculating on NFTs. That's what I kind of initially thought when it first came up. But then, your last caller said there's 6 of them, so there's technically a bunch of bananas out there.
Well done.
He also talked about Picasso's split, and that just had me laughing.
Oh, well played. God, crikey.
I know.
You're on the ball.
I've been on the line a while.
Clearly, the Picasso split.
Yeah. But the big thing for me is the banana itself. When I was travelling around Albania filming with the old man, we learned that during the communist era, the banana was seen as a capitalist fruit, right? So it's for some reason, I don't know exactly why, but they also spoil very quickly, and they have to be kept on their own because they release this chemical in a fruit. That's why you have a banana boat. You don't ship them with any other fruit. So this piece of art has to be kept on its own, away from other things, because it will spoil them. And I have no artistic license. I have artists in my families, and they always say that I am the simplest art person ever. But that's why I think there's something in that.
Yeah. I'm not. I mean, I guess it depends how much money you've got, doesn't it? If you're going to spend $6 million, but the idea that it's worth more than the accumulated value of a banana and a piece of duct tape is obvious, actually. And if you are really, really stupidly rich, there's another dimension of pleasure of ownership. In what Marcus was talking about, looking at it and laughing, and looking at it and just enjoying it. You've got the added sort of sad but true element of materialism, where you've also got the satisfaction of owning it, of being able to own it. Every time you look at it, not only do you get a piece of the artist's mischief, but you can pat yourself on the back for being so rich.
Yeah, exactly. And I almost think you'd probably pay the artist to come back and re-put it up for you just for a laugh.
Yeah, just because you can.
Yeah,
just because you can.
But I do think there is something about the banana as well. Obviously, the Velvet Underground album, the Andy Warhol and picture, and I just do think there's something in that, and I think that's down to the fact that it's seen as a capitalist fruit, according to this lady that we interviewed in Albania. That's
you can see why. That sort of example. I love that. For people who don't know what you're talking about, when you say you're on the road with your old man, Jack and his dad Rick Stein not only run restaurants together, but also make television programs together. You didn't do Venice to Istanbul with your dad, did you?
I did. That's when we're in Albania.
Were you on well, did you go to the Moussaka place in Cardamilli?
No, you didn't know.
That's the one I didn't. You weren't there, because that is my favourite. That's my favourite restaurant. And
really?
Yeah. Do you know how much, what's the word, memorabilia, or how much attention there is in that restaurant to the fact that Rick Stein once went there and competed on a moussaka making competition with the lady that... Do you know what they've done to commemorate it?
No.
Absolutely nothing.
Oh, that's nice.
So I'm sitting there thinking, I'm sure this is the one that was in Rick Stein's TV programme, and I'm looking around for a photo or for something. Absolutely nothing. Not a dicky bird, not an aubergine. Nothing at all.
He did once say the best fish and chip restaurant in the country was in Scotland, and they had a big cutout of him.
That's what you'd expect.
It changed hands, and he suddenly got all these complaints, and we were going to Scotland on a holiday. He stopped the car, ran into the chip shop, and came out with a cardboard cutout of himself, got in the car, closed the door as if and we're like, what just happened? He was just like, it's changed hands, I'm getting loads of complaints, I've taken the cutout out.
So it still looked as if he was endorsing it with the new management who weren't... Oh, that's fantastic. You see, you take these things seriously. That's almost a non-fungible token in and of itself, isn't it? The original Rick Stein endorsement. Jack Stein, of course, running the restaurants down in Padstow now. Always a pleasure, mate. Thank you. 12:55 is the time. And we turn attention now to this week's Full Disclosure, which is with someone else whose company I enjoy enormously. I speak of the historian and presenter Dan Snow, who has he's done so much. He's do you ever meet people who make you feel that you probably should have tried a bit harder at life? Dan Snow is very much one of those people.
The funny thing about me is that my privilege is very obvious because I have a second. I'm Jon Snow, Channel 4 News dad on Newsnight election programs. So but actually what I say to people, that's the tip of the iceberg. Actually, funny enough, not super important. You know, Jon Snow and Dad didn't strong arm anyone at the BBC had given me a job when I was in my late 20s. But they're also right to point at me as the product of enormous privilege. But it's the more hidden stuff. It's the unseen stuff. It's the reason I was rowing at Oxford in the first place. It's the reason I was able to converse about history in an engaging manner, because that's what we did as a family from the day we had it with our mother's milk. So, yes, I think a lot. We were taught not to go into this industry because and now I feel the same way about mine. I'd be interested to know what you think about your kids. But my dad took me for a walk around Barnes Pond when this call came in saying Dan is rowing at Oxford and he's been in these sort of videos, these sort of, you know, the Oxford and Cambridge boat race can be a bit dull, so they sort of spruce up with videos of students going, I'm so tired, I've got to do my studies and train. And so I was one of said whining students. And someone at the BBC Development said, what about him doing a show, history, because I was talking about history in this thing. And hang on, his dad's on, why don't we get them doing a show together? I'm great. And my dad originally said no, and then he also took me around. We walked around Barnes Pond in South West London. He said, you're better than this. Which I wished was true, but he hoped, as we all did, that because in his career he'd met architects and engineers, and people building canals, and he sort of thought those guys that's pretty. And of course those guys probably thought they want their kids to be journalists. You know, it's this never-ending dance that we're all in. And I'd die now if my kids wanted to become broadcasters. I'm like, please go and become bioengineers or something exciting.
Is the distinction between achievements and talking about other people's achievements, or is that too simple?
I wonder if he did feel like that. I wonder if he felt after a long career he would like to have done more things rather than just constantly reporting and chasing around, listening to gossip about them, and grabbing Margaret Thatcher as she came out of a meeting. I wonder if Dad thought, God, maybe I should have tried to be in that meeting myself. What's so sad and strange about us weird humans is then you meet the politicians who spend all their time trying to jump on, become your colleagues here, on the radio.
Sort of pleading for my holiday cover.
Yeah, exactly. And Elon Musk wishes he's a politician, and politicians wish they're Elon Musk. We're all in this sort of mad merry-go-round of insecurity.
We cover quite a lot of ground in that interview, as you can tell, but it reminds me I should reveal who wrote the book being reviewed here. We witness all the classical psychological weakness of the conspiracy theorist here, the breakdown in epistemological safeguards that see someone's judgment corrode once they begin to think this way. The first is cui bono, who benefits? The author asks this repeatedly, as conspiracy theorists always do. And the author of the book was Nadine Dorries, who, of course, is still taken seriously and still corners some corners of the media. But what can you do, eh? That's it from me for another day. If you missed it, that was Dan Snow, as I said, on Full Disclosure. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Ben Kentish is in for Tom today, but Sheila Fogarty is all here.
In for no one. Thank you very much indeed.
James O'Brien on LBC.